Hogwarts, the first capitalist of the magical world. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 253, Unexpected Reason. Don't you have anything you want to explain? Karl placed the wine glass in his hand heavily on the table, crossed his arms, and stared at the handsome old man in front of him with a cheetah-like sharp look point. As soon as the opening banquet was over, he rushed to this colorful, oh no, it should be a small house that challenges the ultimate application of human optical color, to confront the handsome old man in front of him point. But the other party looked like a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water, sitting on a chair beside him with his legs crossed point while tasting the unique Argentinian tequila. He looked at himself with a weird smile on his face. I thought you would be happy. Grindelwald took a sip of the wine in the glass, as if it was a matter of course. Why should I be happy? Karl continued to restrain himself, but was on the verge of exploding. You inexplicably sent someone to me, and it had to be that little brat. Why did you do this? Do you know how much trouble this will bring to my future life? Will there be any trouble? Grindelwald smiled, gently shook the wine in the glass, and pretended to be thinking for a while. I thought it would be more fun. After all, there's not a lot you can learn in this school. I thought you might be bored, so I specially found some fun for you. What fun? Karl couldn't help it and roared. Don't speculate about my life with your disgusting thoughts. Your behavior has violated the agreement between us. You must give me a reasonable explanation before I can evaluate the possibility of our continued cooperation. Don't be so heartless. Grindelwald put down his wine glass and softened his tone. He's saying that there is no relationship between us other than cooperation? You know, your life comes from me. As he spoke, Grindelwald had a look of deep hurt on his face. Put away that expression. But Karl on the side didn't buy it at all. He stared at the handsome old man in front of him and said in a cold tone, "Stop playing such disgusting tricks. I want a reason, a completely reasonable reason." Grindelwald, who did not get the answer he wanted, quickly put away the sad expression on his face point. He tilted his head and supported his face with his left hand. He placed his right hand on the table in front of him and tapped it lightly while speaking slowly. No problem. I can certainly give you a satisfactory reason. I'm doing this purely out of consideration for you. What? Karl screamed out of control, standing up and roaring angrily. Placing that brat next to me was actually for my own good. How can you say such shameless words? You know, as long as he is by my side, not to mention that my work cannot be carried out, my life will become a mess. Calm down. Looking at Karl, who was roaring madly, Grindelwald waved his hands repeatedly. Don't be so anxious. Listen to what I have to say, and then you can decide for yourself whether to keep him. Okay. Karl panted and slowly sat down in his seat. Finally, he stared at Grindelwald and said unhappily, "You'd better have a good reason." Of course. Faced with the threat, Grindelwald smiled slightly, then tapped the table lightly with his finger. A blue light screen appeared above the desktop. It was a three-dimensional world map with several eye-catching red dots on each continent point. Grindelwald pointed at the marks and spoke in a serious tone. These are some details I have summarized, based on the strategic development report you gave me before. Don't be anxious, and listen to me slowly. In general, you want to use the combination of magic and technology to reconstruct a special economic system, taking the chip and internet industries that you have been focusing on most recently as an example. If I'm not mistaken, the game console I gave to those little kids before should only be considered a special model. You should want to create a mobile terminal device without physical buttons, full touch, that can access the internet anytime, anywhere, and play music and videos online. I remember you called this device a smartphone in your report. Let me think about it. You actually read the entire report. Cole was a little shocked. You know, this report was not a briefing he sent to Grindelwald alone. It is a complete report full of the traditions of the British bureaucracy, addressed to the board of directors of the first savings bank of the entire wizarding world. The entire report is extremely complex and makes use of a large number of characteristic long and short sentences. Some simple questions are expanded endlessly into ornate but meaningless articles. A normal person would feel dizzy after just one glance at it, let alone wizards who have no habit of reading. The purpose of writing this report was to make it so that those pureblood wizards would either not be able to understand it or would not have the time to understand it. Even if they did, either you don't have time or you don't want to read it. In short, there is only one purpose, which is to get as much information as possible into your own hands, in order to strengthen their control over the bank. They never thought that the handsome old man in front of them actually read the entire report. "You really surprise me," he said sincerely, "that you can read the entire report and extract the important information from it. Based on this alone, I think our cooperation is enough to continue." As he spoke, Karl couldn't help but look Grindelwald up and down again, then said with a sigh, "If you were 60 or 70 years younger, things would be much easier." Hearing this, Grindelwald smiled and waved his hands, crossing his arms like Karl did before. Looking at the young man in front of him, he kept smiling and remained silent. After being stared at by an old man with a smile for a long time, Karl felt a little nervous, but soon he seemed to understand something. But he seemed unwilling to accept this reality. He kept thinking and shaking his head, muttering to himself, "That's impossible. When we first met, that kid was a carbon copy of young Voldemort. Shouldn't he be a middle school boy who thinks pureblood wizards are supreme? How is that possible? How is that possible?" Just as Karl kept denying, Grindelwald took out a thick file from a drawer that had been prepared long ago. He threw it directly in front of the other person and finally sat back in his seat, drinking and speaking bluntly. "Don't doubt your guess. That kid is really very good. It took him less than one night. After reading your report, here are all his records and originals. You can enjoy them for yourself. After you make your judgment, we can talk about other topics." Chapter 254, A Little Civil Servant Shock in the British Empire. Looking at the A4 paper filled with text, various marks made with red and blue pencils, and emphasized explanations at several key points just by looking at it, Karl felt a little fascinated. It had been a long time since he had worked on a report. Feel the logical power invested by the reader. The actual report is carefully divided into multiple parts. The report is logically coherent and interconnected. Even a person with intellectual disabilities can easily understand all the contents of the report. Perfect. Karl put down the report in his hand and praised sincerely without hesitation. "If you hadn't handed it to me personally, I would have every reason to doubt the reading solution part of this report. It comes from a think tank in some country, or at the very least, a bar association with extraordinary qualifications. The content analysis was very thorough, and the author even put forward his own opinions. I was really inspired after reading it, of course." Hearing Karl's approval, Grindelwald smiled and said with some complacency, "I have always been very accurate in judging people. This child will be of great help to you, especially for your future plans. For example, the first step of your plan is to produce the smartphone you designed. Your original design plan is the design of smartphones and the manufacturing of chips are located in London and Europe, respectively, with the core chip design of mobile phones. Then it will return to the United States, and as for the assembly link with the lowest profit in the entire industrial chain, it will be placed in the big country in the East. I have to admit that your plan was great. All aspects were perfect, and everyone got what they wanted during the entire production process. Logically, there shouldn't be too many obstacles, but the reality doesn't seem to be what you think. It's not easy to deal with the British side." Hearing this, Karl fell silent, but as the handsome old man in front of him said, "At the beginning, it might be because of the smooth sailing in the magic world. It made him forget the logic behind how the world works as he held this grand report with full confidence. When he was preparing to boost the British Empire's collapsing manufacturing industry, he was greeted with a head-on blow. Because he had no background or suitable identity. Not to mention number 10 Downing Street. He couldn't even be a front desk staff with a registered patent. It also allowed him to see the efficiency of the British Empire. He still remembered the first day when he asked Hermione's father, Mr. Granger, to help him register the patent. A fat lady with a large body resembling a donut simply glanced at Mr. Granger, then they casually threw out a form and asked me to fill it out without any explanation. After Mr. Granger filled out the form according to his own requirements and submitted it, it was returned. I saw Snorlax eating a donut while pointing his finger to the top of the table. The category is wrong. This should be a mechanical product. Why did you write electronic invention? Please fill it out again and submit it again. After saying that, just when Mr. Granger was about to ask if he could just change the product category and resubmit, that damn Snorlax seemed to be able to predict it and shouted in an unpleasant voice, the application form must be filled out again immediately without any alterations. In this way, another 20 minutes were wasted. Mr. Granger finally filled out the complicated form again and handed it over with the drawing. That damn Snorlax just glanced at him lightly and said the same thing again. To be able to draw the structure of a drawing, you must have red and blue markers, and you only have black lines here. A new blueprint must be drawn up. So the two of them declared failure on the first day, and on the second day they came to the office windowsill again. A new show was staged again. This time, the Snorlax did not say that it was a color problem. She just shook her pig head and said it casually. What about the attachments to the drawings? Drawings drawn by hand alone cannot be patented. They must be scanned by a computer, send it to the electronic archive for record at the same time, and then get the receipt back. Another good day was wasted, and on the third day the tick came again. The return receipt needs to be reported to the machinery management office of the municipal department and must be certified by a local university or scientific institution of the same level. We can't allow people to apply for a new patent just because they invented a bottle cap that can be easily opened and closed. In this way, after spending more than a week going back and forth, he and Mr. Granger finally gathered a pile of documents that was more than a person tall. When I came to the window again, the Snorlax had disappeared and was replaced by a stick insect. A middle-aged man with a bald head and dry skin like tree bark came to greet them again, but the guy started talking. Karl almost collapsed and saw the stick insect speaking in a weak voice. Mr. Granger, if I'm not mistaken, this should be an electronic invention. Why did you write it as a mechanical product invention? From that day on, Karl never set foot in that office again. He suddenly began to understand that sometimes a country rises and falls. Maybe it has never been about luck or metaphysics. Everything is destined, and the foreshadowing has already been laid. You are a very smart child, and also very realistic. The suffering you endured in that building made you lose your illusions about this world early on. But sometimes, people are prone to fantasy, just like when I was on top of that tall tower. Whenever the warm sunlight shone on me, I always dream that I have returned to that summer. But when I open my eyes, all I can see is the mountains and snow. Grindelwald looked at Karl, who was lost in his painful memories, and said calmly. Then he moved the report a little towards the other person and gently patted the cover with his hand. He can help you now. You are so proud that you would never allow yourself to hide your real name to accommodate those you despise. Think about it this way. You are quite filial to me, your father. I'm very pleased. So I want to help you. Kit, Kevin Lestrange, the future heir of the French Lestrange family, has received the most formal elite education since childhood, and his family has extraordinary influence in the Muggle society throughout Europe. They have married into the French royal family many times. Even now, they still have the blood of Queen Elizabeth flowing in their veins. Thanks to his help, it's much easier to get things done in the UK. Indeed. Karl nodded slightly, agreeing with the other party's statement, but the moment he looked up, he changed the subject and spoke very firmly. But please allow me to decline this offer. Chapter 255. One bad news and one damn news. Can I ask why? Karl, who still refused despite his earnest persuasion. Grindelwald was not angry. He just asked calmly. Carol didn't have any intention of apologizing or explaining. He picked up the wine on the table and spoke in an unusually calm manner. Of course you should get a perfect explanation. The reason is very simple. The person you recommended is a little too good. What does this mean? Is being too good a mistake? Grindelwald was puzzled. Karl spoke calmly while shaking his wine glass. Of course not. Everyone appreciates and desires excellent people, but if I really accept your kindness, I will be with such an excellent person. Then, he will definitely play an extremely important role in my plan. But how do I resolve the issues of identity and loyalty? Yes, according to your plan, Theodora Grindelwald and Karl Hohenzollern are just two sides of the same coin. But, if I'm not mistaken, the other party shouldn't know this secret. Then how can I guarantee that I can control him? How can we guarantee that at some point in the future, he won't do something unpredictable and uncontrollable because he knows this secret? After saying this, Cole picked up the wine glass, ready to drink the wine in the glass and leave. However, he didn't expect that Grindelwald on the other side looked at him as if he was a fool. The old man didn't say anything, but just kept staring at him until Cal couldn't stand the gaze any longer. Asked a little impatiently, "You're looking at me like that. Do you have something to say? If you have something to say, just say it. There's no need for this kind of communication between the two of us." But even though he asked a direct question, the old man in front of him still stared at him with the kind of caring eyes for the mentally retarded. So much so that Carol felt a little unconfident later, thinking that there was something dirty on his face at the banquet just now. He stretched out his hands and touched his face like a little sea otter washing its face, but he didn't find any food residue or stains, and until this moment. Grindelwald suddenly shouted wildly, "Ha! Ha ha ha, that's very interesting, my dear child. Do you understand now what your greatest weapon is? There is no doubt that it is this face of yours. Now I understand that you lack a sufficient understanding of your own charm. Even if Kevin Lestrange has been seduced by Theodora Grindelwald, I believe you have a way to bring him back to your heart. Don't worry, you don't have to worry about anything. Sometimes it feels so wonderful. I was young, handsome, and self-important back then, but when I saw Al that summer, all great ideals and all great ambitions were instantly turned into nothing by those eyes. You will definitely make him your most loyal follower. You." When Carol heard this at first, he just felt a little embarrassed, but in an instant he seemed to understand something. He stood up suddenly, pointed at the handsome old man in front of him, and said with gritted teeth, "I've been fooled by you again, you damn old bastard. What's this about thinking about me and my plan? You are just doing this for your own pleasure. You just want to see my life go wrong. What's wrong with encountering some twists and turns?" Grindelwald did not deny it, but just stared at the young man in front of him with a smile. "You are so outstanding, kid. Whether it's the magic education in this school or your future plans, you will only encounter a few obstacles at most. You are good enough to handle all problems. But wouldn't life be very boring like this? Your life now needs to have some problems that you can't solve. Only then will your life be exciting enough. I am doing this for your own good, my dear child." Yow. Carl was almost going crazy. In his past life, he had never encountered anyone like the old man in front of him. He kept making fun of himself and always found completely justifiable reasons for himself. In this silver-haired old man, he finally understood the feeling of many ordinary British wizards when facing the Dark Lord. However, compared to the fear that ordinary wizards felt when facing Voldemort, this old man made him feel disgusted and helpless. There is a type of young man who becomes very rebellious when he grows up and suddenly discovers that his father is even more rebellious and non-mainstream than himself. At most, I just dyed my hair yellow, but the other party directly produced a complete cosplay and forced me to go to the comic convention. Carl, deeply hit, was ready to leave this sad place. And Grindelwald opposite him also turned back into Gilderoy Lockhart. This change in image made him feel that his despicable temperament began to become more and more prominent. But just as he was about to leave, he suddenly looked back. With one foot already outside the door, he looked up and down at the peacock in front of him, as if he suddenly remembered something, and asked tentatively in a trembling voice, "Dear Old man, I want to ask you a question. After you have replaced the identity of this image, where did the original Professor Gilderoy Lockhart go? Don't tell me you locked him up. It's been almost half a year. This question made Grindelwald a little confused. He seemed to have just remembered something. He covered his mouth with one hand and had an embarrassed expression on his face. Looking at that expression, Karl finally seized the opportunity and started to be unceremoniously sarcastic. It seems that some people are always thinking about interfering in other people's private lives, but they never think that they are just ordinary people who are intoxicated by the pleasures of life. The spell of happiness has blinded your eyes, causing you to make such a low-level mistake. I want to warn you, if a murder happened at Hogwarts, we would both be expelled from the school by the furious headmaster Dumbledore, so I don't want anything bad to happen, of course. After a moment of embarrassment, Grindelwald quickly regained his composure and immediately retorted with a warning. I will convey this sentence to you exactly as it is, so you should hurry up and get well, otherwise something bad will happen. I'm not going anywhere. Faced with such evasive words, Cole was very determined and looked righteous. I am a director of this school. I have the right to choose whether to leave. After confirming the results, human life is more important than anything else, and nothing can stop me. Really? Grindelwald smiled wickedly, staring at the determined blonde boy in front of him, and spoke softly. If I remember correctly, Mr. Kevin Lestrange will be your roommate. He should be in your dormitory now. I'll fuck you. Chapter 256. Discussions of the crowd. In the Hufflepuff common room, this time of year is usually the busiest time of the year. Friends who have not seen each other for a summer vacation have a lot of topics to talk about, such as how their vacation went and where they traveled. After seeing those rare things, younger students might talk more about the delicious food and beautiful scenery, and their words might be mixed with boasting about how much their parents love them. The topics of conversation for older students may be more about the opposite sex, such as whether a boy has grown taller and more handsome after not seeing him for 2 months, which senior sister has become more charming, her figure has become more prominent, and her makeup has become more exquisite. But today, the entire common room was unusually quiet, and everyone seemed to have returned to their half of the dormitory early. The reason why it is half is because most of the people they do have only half of their bodies in the dormitory. Most people stretched out half of their bodies and looked at a corner of the lounge near the door. That was the largest dormitory in the entire Hufflepuff house, and also where Karl lived, but now he was squatting at the door of his dormitory. He pressed his body side against the door as much as possible, with his ear close to the door, as if listening for something. What is Mr. Hohenzollern doing? Why doesn't he go into the dormitory? A little lotus who had just entered Hogwarts spoke first. What? Do you know? Didn't you see anyone moving in just now? A second-year student started to answer in the conversation. I saw it. It seemed to be a first-year student, Kevin Lestrange from the final sorting. The Lestranges are a famous pure-blood family. Shouldn't such a person be assigned to Slytherin? Why was he assigned to our house? Who says it's not true? There must be a story behind this. Didn't you hear Senior Cedric's loud shout? No, I'm not in the mood to understand now. The discussion became more and more heated. At the beginning, the little badgers wanted to control their voices, but as they talked, the volume gradually increased. So much so that Karl, who was trying to hear clearly what was happening in the dormitory, could no longer hear any movement in his own dormitory. I could only stand there awkwardly, not knowing what to do. Fortunately, my students were all innocent and cute enough. At least from now on, the content of the discussion is acceptable. But before he could rejoice for long, Hannah, who had not grown much during the summer vacation, jumped out from nowhere. Looking at the people who were talking about it, his face was full of disappointment. Then he shook his head and spoke in a very low voice. You are all too naive. This is no longer just a simple friendship issue. There must be something very serious going on here. I just went to Slytherin to find out some information from a few seniors, and I have already gotten accurate information. That is this Lestrange. He is not a member of the British Lestrange family, but is from France. In addition, I got the news from Harry and Hermione. Mr. Hohenzollern didn't spend much time in England this summer. The two things are linked together, and Mr. Hohenzollern already has business dealings in the United States and continental Europe. I'm sure this is a cross-border emotional dispute, and the relationship is very complicated. Really? Tell me what other news you have. Do you have a mind map or something? Tell me something quickly. I said that. Mr. Lestrange looked at Mr. Hohenzollern in a different way. No wonder Senior Cedric was so angry. He must have known what was going to happen tonight, so he got himself drunk and tried to escape. Hannas. Words instantly ignited the entire discussion and led the topic in an indescribable direction. The more Karl listened, the more he felt it was excessive, and he couldn't help but complain in his heart. What? Do you mean he wanted to escape? That's totally wrong. He said he was greedy and ate too much, and that's what made him look like that. And there is one more very important piece of information. Just as Cole was complaining in his mind, a group of girls and a few handsome boys were preparing to eat the big melon with great interest. Hannah suddenly pulled out a cut newspaper card from the gap of the notebook she was carrying. Pointing at the photo of the girl above, he spoke in a very low voice with a proud look on his face. Your imagination is so weak. You know who the girl in this photo is. Her name is Theodora Grindelwald. He is a dark wizard of the same level as our headmaster Dumbledore, the heir of Grindelwald. The key point is not important. Look at his face. I have to admit that when I saw this photo, I was amazed by his face. Who do you think is worthy of such a beautiful girl? And who among the male wizards in Europe would not be fascinated by her? While she was speaking, the little badgers who had been hiding just now all spontaneously walked out of the room and took turns to admire the photo. You're human. I guess even the greatest artist can't draw this face. This is magic. It must be magic. No, even magic can't do it to this extent. Even a villa can't have such charm without any surprise. As the photos were passed to each new owner, exclamations filled the entire public lounge. Even though the photo was unusually blurry, it was just a casual shot taken by Honora as he was leaving at the end of the speech. The photos did not show the front or the whole body, only a side profile, but it doesn't seem to affect anything now. There were more and more voices of admiration around him, and Karl's face became redder and redder. He considered himself to be a very strong man mentally. He is also very thick-skinned and can often remain expressionless when facing accusations and abuse from others. But when he heard this weird compliment, even he found it difficult to accept it calmly. He just stood at the door of the dormitory. On the one hand, he didn't know what the situation was in the dormitory, so he didn't dare to rush in. On the other hand, the discussion in the lounge began to become more and more excessive. The topic of the forbidden relationship between Grindelwald and Dumbledore's heir has even come up. Finally, under the pressure of two choices, Karl finally made a decision. After all, if he used the black magic of large-scale forced amnesia and sleep, it might cause my dear classmates to collectively lose their memory or turn into fools, which is better than making all the students in the entire college become fools. Going back to the dormitory to face a fool is obviously a more economical and wiser choice. Just like that, with a loud bang of a door closing, the embarrassing discussion disappeared, and only a sound was heard coming from the room. Carol, save me, this guy is bullying me. Chapter 257. Anxious Kevin Lestrange. Who's talking? After hearing this sentence inexplicably, Karl quickly looked in the direction of the voice. Cedric had a really weird posture before. One hand up, one hand down, left foot forward, right foot backward, lying slumped on his bed. At the same time, his face was distorted, his tongue stretched out long, and he shouted incoherently, "It's me. It's me. You need to get that guy out of here. He stabbed me with a strange magic item. I just collapsed on the bed and couldn't move. Please save me. This is really uncomfortable." Looking at the paralyzed Cedric, Carol was just about to step forward to check the situation when a calm and peaceful voice came from behind him. "No need to check on the situation. He's been a bit too noisy since I first stepped into this room. He was like a golden retriever whose territory had been invaded. He kept yelling and saying things that were completely irrelevant. I just couldn't stand it, so I gave him a few acupuncture needles. he will only be paralyzed for a short while. Once he is quiet, he will gradually fall asleep. There will be no problem after he wakes up. By the way, it can also consume some of the excess sugar stored in his body. Thank you so much. Karl turned his head with difficulty, only to see Kevin Lestrange in his pajamas next to his desk. There was a standard French small dining table, and an automatic espresso machine was brewing coffee. The moment he saw him looking back, Karl could 100% guarantee that the other party was stunned for a second, but his emotions were calmed down very quickly. Unlike a certain pumpkin-head guy paralyzed in bed who tried to make advances on someone when they first met. Would you like a cup? Panama's cherry geisha coffee, fully sun-dried and lightly roasted, tastes great, and the caffeine content is very low, so if you are not in a hurry to go to bed, it is also a good drink. After a moment of confusion, Kevin Lestrange quickly used the coffee machine to brew 2 cups of fragrant coffee. And he directly extended an invitation to Karl, watching him use magic to shrink his body from the arrogant young nobleman. When they met before, Karl turned into a little boy with a little baby fat on his face. While marveling at the power of magic, he couldn't help but find the other party's behavior a little funny. But he accepted the invitation and waited until he sat down. Kevin Lestrange stirred the coffee in front of him with an exquisite silver spoon. While trying hard to appear nonchalant. In my family, many people hold a very contemptuous attitude towards these muggle machines. They always think that wizards with magic are far superior to muggles. I never dare to use these machines at home. I could only hide them in my secret base and study and observe them secretly. However, after coming to the UK, I found that the British wizarding world is completely different from that of France. It seems that this is all because of you, Mr. Hohenzollern. By the way, I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Kevin Lestrange. I'm from France, and I'm currently staying at my aunt's house. Cough. Cough. Karl suddenly had a violent coughing fit. He really couldn't help it, and could only drink coffee while hiding his embarrassment. It was obvious that the guy in front of him was very anxious and wanted to quickly get closer to him in order to achieve his lurking purpose. But the technique is really too childish, just like a boy or girl who has been single all his life suddenly meets the opposite sex who makes their heart beat. You can only hope to attract the other person's attention by constantly talking about the other person's interests and use a lot of words to cover up your embarrassment. So he drank his coffee without replying, wanting to tease the guy in front of him. As he expected, Kevin Lestrange became nervous when he saw that the other party did not react at all. He took a big gulp of the boiling hot coffee, which was so hot that he kept sticking out his tongue to fan it wildly. Karl on the opposite side was trying hard to hold back his laughter. Why didn't he answer me? I have carefully investigated this guy and found out that he is Dumbledore's heir. That should be influenced by that old guy. He shouldn't like dealing with muggles and hope that wizards and muggles can coexist peacefully. Combined with his various performances in the British wizarding world, this idea should be verified. But why is there no response? Kevin Lestrange was brainstorming frantically. Although in Karl's mind, he should now be a clown who uses coffee to cover up his embarrassment and whose face turns red in order to hold back his laughter. But in Kevin Lestrange's eyes, he was an extremely handsome and cold blonde boy wearing an exquisite black wizard robe. Even to show formality, the khaki tie at the collar is tied with an exquisite Windsor knot. He was half leaning lazily on the chair, crossing his legs and holding a tray in his left hand. The fingers of his right hand were stuck to the white bone china coffee cup, and there was a meaningful smile on the corner of his mouth. The lowered eyes did not even look at himself. The invisible pressure was simply indescribable. Kevin Lestrange now felt that cold sweat had begun to appear on his forehead, and he looked at the boy in front of him with more vigilance. The one who is unworthy as Dumbledore's heir, the stinky old Dumbledore who sits at the head of the Great Hall with hair dyed like a pile of shit. He must be hiding something. He is definitely not as kind as he appears to be. It turns out that he is hiding something from his heir. This ruthless and decisive aura has not been hidden due to education. What should I do now? Just When Carol was about to hold back his laughter and wanted to speak to ease the awkward atmosphere, Kevin Lestrange on the opposite side was brainstorming frantically after some intense thinking. He didn't think what he had just done was so deliberate and childish, and he finally came to this conclusion. I must have not been professional enough in what I said just now. Having similar interests is only the criterion for friendship. I want a wizarder who can rival my master. There must be some higher pursuit. Considering the report that the master showed me before, the other party must want to have one extremely professional and capable men. There must be nothing wrong with this, I say. Cole was just about to speak after he couldn't help it. Kevin Lestrange suddenly threw a pile of reports on the table and looked at Karl seriously. Mr. Hohenzollern, I know your ideals. You hope to achieve peace between the two worlds and gain hope for our future. I don't want violence and war to happen. I agree with that. Here are some materials I compiled. Please allow me to waste some of your time. Let me interpret that for you. Damn it. Another social idiot. Karl's face twitched wildly. Chapter 258, a passing answer. Looking at the determined eyes of the boy in front of him, Karl knew that it was very impolite to think this way, but he just couldn't help it. He had already imagined a scene in his mind, which was what the other party wanted to perform now. He is an idealist who was suppressed by the secular world and reality, and suddenly met like-minded comrades and organizations. The urgency of wanting to join the organization and realize his ideals had already been radiated from the inside out through his expressions and actions. If I hadn't known the other person's identity in advance, and the two of us had never met or known each other, maybe he would be moved. But now he just found it funny. So, in order to hold back his laughter, he acted like a political commissar of an organization. Staring at the other person with firm eyes, he held the documents with one hand and supported the table with the other hand, leaning his body forward slightly. I appreciate your trust, Mr. Lestrange, but at the same time I have to be skeptical of a strange little wizard I've never met. Why do you have so much information? Why are you so eager to join my business? I will not read these documents. Please convince me with your words. Sure enough, he was a little skeptical of me and asked me to show my ability, and I was right. A second ago, Lestrange felt secretly delighted, thinking that he had guessed the other person's inner thoughts correctly. But in just the next second, his rational analytical ability seemed to disappear completely from his mind. There is only one voice left in the entire brain. Why are those eyes so beautiful, as blue and deep as gemstones? He didn't know how long he stared there stupidly until he heard a voice calling him. Mr. Lestrange, Mr. Lestrange, is there something dirty on my face? I'm sorry, I was a little distracted just now. Kevin Lestrange quickly lowered his head, apologized softly, and put his right hand over his left chest, feeling the beating of the gold pocket watch on his chest. I said this to myself with guilt. My light, I pray to you, give me the strength to resist the temptation of beauty. Under your shining light, may my heart remain pure and not be lost in momentary pleasures. Please guide me to uphold my morals and principles so that I can stand firm in the face of temptation. Amen. After finishing his prayer, he felt that the guilt deep in his heart had dissipated a little, but he didn't dare to look up easily. After taking a few deep breaths, he lowered his head and spoke softly. I need a little time to think. Okay, of course. Karl nodded with a smile, but he also had a hint of doubt in his heart. He seemed to have sensed some strange feelings just now. It felt like someone was praying to him, but that didn't matter. The key point now was to quickly resolve the issue at hand. After a brief moment of thought, Kevin Lestrange spoke again. But this time he didn't look up, because he knew that the other person was very close to him, and he could feel the heat radiating from the other person's body. He must resist temptation with action, and he must be true to his own light. First, let me answer your first question. Why do I have so much information? The reason is very simple. It comes from my family. I believe that even people who don't know much about the wizarding world have heard of the name Lestrange. As one of the oldest pureblood families, our family has always been very concerned about the changes in the magical world and has been continuously collecting information. The family is well versed in many secrets of the wizarding world, not to mention someone as outstanding as you. Although, what I'm going to say next may sound like a compliment. Even my arrogant relatives have to admit that it's because of your presence. The British wizarding world has undergone significant changes, not to mention that you defeated Voldemort. That's quite capable. Karl's mood suddenly became happy, not because the other party was flattering him, just because the other party's answer is indeed quite good. I use my last name to increase the credibility of what I say next. He used his family as a cover to clear himself, and finally flattered the other party to make it easier for the other party to accept this explanation. Although the overall answer is not excellent, it can be considered passing points, so Karl continued to smile. I accept this explanation. Now let's move on to the second question. Why should I accept you to join my plan? Please give me a perfect reason like the one just now, Kevin. Lestrange breathed a sigh of relief, and without any hesitation or excessive questioning, he continued to analyze with his head down. Before I answer, I would like to briefly analyze the problems the organization is facing now. Can't you just give a direct answer? Karl asked. No. Kevin Lestrange answered simply. Before you understand the problem, any answer will be hasty. Although we are all wizards with magic, I have to admit that many people in my family look down on muggles, but the theoretical tools created by muggles on many issues are still very useful for reference, such as answering a question. Giving a direct answer is often very hasty. You have to go through 3 steps. That is, what is the problem, why does the problem occur, and how to solve the problem. The information I showed you before is a process by which I figured out what the problem is, so I must explain it clearly before answering. Then, tell me. Carol didn't dwell on this question anymore. Kevin Lestrange continued. First of all, in the past year, the British wizarding world has basically been under your control. You control the entire British wizarding world, 86% of commercial shops, 100% of the public opinion industry, including the Daily Prophet, and the newly emerged live TV channels. Your presence is behind all new products. The only downside may be that there are still challenging competitors in the financial industry. However, the Gringotts robbery that happened a few days ago has perfectly solved this problem. So now the entire organization is facing an urgent problem. It should no longer be a magical world. After all, even the pure-blood families with the most noble bloodlines have lost the ability to fight against you. So, according to my analysis, your next target is the Muggle world based in the UK. As for what projects are involved, I cannot give you an answer until I get exact information, but I can tell you what I think in advance. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 259 Angry Cedric. Do you need me to tell you about the follow-up plan first? Karl also became interested and asked the other party. No need. Kevin Lestrange still answered very straightforwardly. Although he hadn't raised his head until now, his tone began to become more firm and confident. Although I have previously emphasized the 3-step approach to problem solving, sometimes it is necessary to make a decision only after fully understanding the problem and fully analyzing it, although it is a manifestation of rationality and responsibility. It also appears to be somewhat conservative and incompetent. Perhaps in some special stages, you need some radical and unconventional advice. Oh my god. Karl couldn't help but feel a little happy, even though he had already understood the other party's abilities during his previous communication with Grindelwald. But when he heard the other party say such words face to face, he couldn't help but feel a little relieved. What a considerate subordinate who cared about the boss. It's much more considerate than that pumpkinhead who is still lying on his bed and performing toad rolls. So he didn't hesitate for a moment and pretended to be a little excited. Then, tell me, if we want to implement my next possible plan in the UK, where do you think we should start first? It's done. Kevin Lestrange was excited, and his self-confidence increased instantly. It seems that my previous analysis was completely correct. The other party really values ability more. I can complete the master's task, my light. I will prove that I'm the one who deserves to be invited to dance. He prayed silently in his heart again. After feeding himself all the spiritual food, he finally raised his head and looked at the handsome blonde boy in front of him and said with a firm look in his eyes, "Politics, can you be more specific? I think our next goal should not be to focus on the economy like the British wizarding world. We should focus all our attention on politics. Power is the womb of money. The biggest difference between muggles and wizards, it's just that the differences between them are very small. In the magical world, people naturally trust and admire outstanding magical geniuses and powerful wizards, but it's completely different in the muggle world. They rely on the legal and political system to build a framework for their lives. If we want to enter this framework, we must start from the top of the pyramid, starting with the political aspect. What about the specific entry point?" Karl remained calm. "Prime Minister election." Kevin Lestrange gave the answer. He also looked very serious, with determination on his face. But if you look closely, you can see a hint of redness deep in the boy's face. His clenched hands and slightly shaking body made him realize that he was not as serious and earnest as he appeared to be. He seemed to be trying hard to fight against something evil. But Cole was not in the mood to pay attention to those things. He was really happy now. This was the first time he heard the same idea as his own from a wizard. Moreover, he was a perfect subordinate when the other party had no idea about his specific plans. With this feeling in mind, he liked the other person more and more, the one in front of him who used magic to make himself younger. The cute boy with black hair and black eyes, who still looks a little immature, is indeed an important helper that he will need next. On the other side, as Carol inadvertently moved his body closer and closer to him, Kevin Lestrange felt his heart beating faster and faster, while the rational mind told him, "I should get away from this dangerous guy as soon as possible, but my body seems to be not listening to my brain." He was frozen in place, unable to even move back towards the chair. Just as he felt the hot breath of the other person getting closer, a roar suddenly came from the dormitory. "Carol, quickly get this guy to remove the magic from me." "No, what do you two want to do?" Cedric roared loudly. He was now lying on the bed, unable to move his eyes, which resulted in a narrow field of vision. And what a coincidence, his bed was right next to Karl's desk. So from his angle, he could only see Karl moving his body slightly closer to Kevin Lestrange. Two heads overlapped each other, right in front of him. "We are discussing work." Karl turned his head to the side, looked at Cedric helplessly, and said impatiently, "It's already late, go to bed early. I don't want to see a senior acting as the last one to leave the common room in front of the freshmen again." "What nonsense are you talking about?" Cedric blushed immediately, but he still said stubbornly, "It's just because I have to take care of the flowers and plants in the common room, that's why I'm a little later than others." After saying this, he probably felt that this reason was not sufficient, and suddenly added something, as if possessed by some strange impulse, "And in the days that followed, the reason why I stayed up later than others was because there was a slob living in my dorm. I had to clean up the whole room, help someone take their dirty clothes to the laundry room, and even supervise someone eating breakfast." "Shut up." Karl stood up with a red face, then looked at Kevin Lestrange sharply. "Can you give him a few more injections, maybe to disable his language system, so he can't speak for a week or something like that?" "What do you want to do? You are seeking revenge. You two must be planning to do something bad behind my back." Upon hearing this, Cedric screamed. Kevin Lestrange shook his head very seriously. "No, I can't hurt my senior." "Really?" Karl didn't want to give up. "Listen to me, you ungrateful guy." Cedric felt a little warmed as he looked at Kevin Lestrange. The previous 100% hostility also increased to 1% guilt. But the fact is that every time he feels guilty, he always finds that he feels guilty too early. "I can't hurt my senior. If I want to make him lose his language system function, I need to stick a needle into his face. I'm not that skilled. I'm likely to paralyze his facial muscles or even turn him into a fool." Kevin Lestrange still spoke very seriously. "It's okay. He's already stupid enough It's acceptable to lower his IQ a little bit. Let's do it, Karl. Still didn't want to give up. Only Cedric collapsed on his bed, suddenly realizing what Karl had told him before, that there are no good people in this world. Seeing the two of them still talking to each other, he felt sad and felt that he had to release his anger, so he took a deep breath and suddenly yelled, "I hate you too. You two bully me." Chapter 260, The Conflicted Professor Flitwick. Okay, dear students, today's spells class ends here. Please go back and review carefully. I hope that in the next class, more people can successfully cast spells. On the podium, Professor Flitwick said goodbye to the students enthusiastically. He was always so enthusiastic, just like this bright and colorful classroom. The entire classroom has changed greatly in style compared to last year. The old-fashioned tile walls are now covered with bright and colorful tiles. The makeshift podium piled with disorganized books was replaced by a small brass elevator that gave it a sense of technology. At the same time, in order to keep his voice loud, Professor Flitwick also likes to hang a small loudspeaker on his body, so that I can enthusiastically pass on all the knowledge to students. All these changes are so huge. And at the same time, the same changes are also happening in every classroom at Hogwarts. For example, Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration classroom has a typical Chinese style, with a large dark green blackboard. It is equipped with a higher podium, so that Professor McGonagall can stand on the podium and see every move of the students in the classroom. Of course, the most distinctive seats are the two seats on both sides of the podium, which are used whenever a student makes a mistake or ranks at the bottom in the weekly tests. They will be assigned those two seats so that they can receive extra tutoring from Professor McGonagall. But just as there are people who are willing to accept change, there are naturally also people who are not so willing to accept change. For example, Professor Snape can be regarded as the leader of the conservative forces in Hogwarts. He rejected Karl's proposal to install high wattage filament lamps in the dim potions classroom. At the same time, the classroom that looks like a vampire's lair was renovated and slightly transformed to be more like a human world. Mr. Hohenzollern, please leave my classroom with your stupid ideas. I will not allow anyone to destroy the atmosphere here. This environment is conducive to you giant monsters with slugs in your heads to feel with your bodies. The great potion masters of the past, the environment and feelings they were in when brewing potions. This is a soul conversation that transcends time and space, even though you guys may never understand it. However, although Professor Snape was very tough, when Cole took out a full set of laboratory-grade chemical instruments, he still accepted it directly with a hypocritical look on his face, especially when Karl gave him a set of high-end weights certified by the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, BIPM. Cole was sure that he saw a light in the old bat's eyes at that time, and everything that happened afterwards further confirmed his thoughts. When Ron touched the set of weights at the end of a potions lesson without using tweezers or wearing gloves, Professor Snape appeared behind the other person like lightning and performed a show of Slytherin's traditional language art for all the students present. The consequences were extremely tragic and the specific circumstances are unknown. But it made a glutton who claimed to have a Gryffindor stomach lose a full 10 kilograms in a week. It can be seen that Professor Snape's methods are extraordinary. Thinking back on this, Karl couldn't help but feel happy. Almost a month had passed since school started, and as expected, he could always enjoy a rare kind of peace at Hogwarts. Mr. Hohenzollern, Mr. Hohenzollern, Professor Flitwick's voice came from above, and Karl looked up quickly, only to see that this cute little old man had come to his side without him noticing. Seeing that I was looking at him, he quickly took out a large roll of parchment from his arms and handed it to me. These are some of the questions you asked me before. They are indeed very interesting. I have to admit that many of the Muggles' ideas are very creative. I never imagined that a simple lighting spell could evolve into so many uses. Many of Isaac Newton's works you mentioned before are also very creative and have benefited me a lot. Professor Flitwick spoke excitedly. Cole was looking carefully at the parchments, which contained theoretical papers on using magic to achieve an optical revolution. They were written in great detail and very much in Professor Flitwick's own style. He was very happy looking at those papers. It seems that my idea is not empty talk, even though I have several books exchanged from the system point. But he knew very well that the complexity of today's technological machinery could not be achieved in a short period of time by relying on a few books. Even if you have a memory palace, the experience and control over the subtle aspects cannot be mastered through simple theoretical learning point. So he began to use one of the only two achievements he had made at Moscow State University. The root of Soviet power, the application of systems engineering. He will be responsible for tasks related to mechanical manufacturing and mechanical design. It was given to Mr. Arthur Wearley, and the most difficult and tiring software programming work was given to Cedric. The theoretical demonstration and design work were respectively undertaken by Professor Flitwick and Professor Snape. All the details of the content, as well as the optimization and innovation of the project, will be open to all Hogwarts students in the form of a quiz with prizes. By utilizing collective rather than individual strength, the duration of the entire work can be greatly shortened. When he thought of this, Karl felt that he was very great, like the chief designer of every great project. He is a leader among leaders, able to maneuver and command the overall situation. As for some people, they just think he is too lazy to work. That is simply slander and completely malicious speculation. After reading all the documents, Karl carefully put them into his ring. Then he looked at Professor Flitwick and thanked him sincerely. Thank you for your help. I think with these, we will soon be able to reap the rewards, and the wizarding world will change once again. Of course. Professor Flitwick nodded with a smile, but Karl could see that the other person seemed to be worried about something. This lovely old man is not very good at hiding his emotions. Whenever he has something on his mind, or is forced to face someone he hates, he would keep fighting with his fingers. Karl looked at Professor Flitwick, whose hands were about to fight each other, and asked in confusion, "Do you have any questions? Or do you have anything else to say? I want to be your student. I should be able to play the role of a listener. There is no need to embarrass yourself in front of me, Professor." Professor Flitwick was startled by the other party's words, and an embarrassed expression appeared on his face. After a fierce fight between the left and right sides, the lovely old man took a deep breath and suddenly looked at the young man in front of him with a serious expression. Said in an extremely serious tone, "Although it is not a professor's job to interfere with students' private lives, I have to emphasize this. Your reputation will be damaged if you abandon others for the sake of the new Mr. Hohenzollern." Chapter 261 Strange Anger. Thanks to your criticism, I will continue to adjust my learning attitude and make progress in my future studies and strive to— What did you just say? Facing Professor Flitwick's accusations, Karl habitually used official terms to evade the question, but halfway through his words he suddenly reacted. He looked at the old man in front of him with an incredulous look and asked with some hopelessness, "Did I hear it wrongly? The phrase getting tired of the old and falling for the new and abandoning others shouldn't be applied to me." "You heard it right." Professor Flitwick ignored the embarrassed expression on Karl's face and began to analyze with the rigor of a scholar. "I just heard some rumors before, and I thought it was just rumors from some bored students, but through my observations over the past week, I clearly feel that Mr. Diggory is in a much lower mood. He was no longer enthusiastic about communicating with others, and he was not attentive during class. The most important thing was that he only showed interest once during lunch. It was discovered that he had only eaten lunch for 2 people, indicating that he was in a very low mood and had even affected his health and appetite. "And you've been hanging out with that Kevin Lestrange for quite some time now. Every time I see you two have smiles on your faces and discuss issues passionately. This is not good. Mr. Hawthorne, you can't do this. It will make people sad." Karl opened his mouth and wanted to defend himself, but couldn't say a word. He couldn't tell the professor in front of him that the reason why Cedric was no longer enthusiastic about communicating with others and fell asleep in class recently. It was because I forced him to work overtime until midnight every day to write code. My appetite decreased at lunchtime just because this guy ate too much midnight snack. He also couldn't imagine that a person could eat 3 servings of midnight snack and still finish 2 servings of lunch at noon point. This situation could actually be determined as poor appetite. As for Kevin Lestrange, he was just discussing work with him point, and it was only 3 times in total, and it wasn't that I didn't invite Cedric point, it was because when I extended the invitation, that guy actually blew his breath out and spoke in a sarcastic tone. Mr. Hohenzollern, did you invite only me, or did you invite others? The issues you discussed are too profound. Don't let a fool like me join the discussion and pollute your thinking rhythm. I think it's better for me to work honestly. Even Professor Snape would find it difficult to achieve that level of weirdness, because Professor Snape simply had a bad temper and was unpopular. Cedric said this. He always felt that the stupid pumpkin on the pumpkin head in front of him had begun to become sour, because it was too mature point. Damn stupid thing, Karl thought indignantly, wondering how he would settle the score with him when he returned to the dormitory point. However, he did not expect that Professor Flitwick's voice would come again. Seeing that he had been motionless all the way, the other party might have thought that he had nothing to say point, so he nodded slightly and spoke in an admonishing tone. As long as you realize your mistake and apologize sincerely, I believe everything can be resolved, but I don't really have much experience when it comes to relationships. This stuff is more difficult than magic, but I believe in girls. But I still want to advise you in the end. Sometimes you need to be loyal to your relationship. Sorry, affection, loyalty. These words kept echoing in Karl's mind, and an indescribable sense of shame and anger arose in his heart. This feeling was very strange. It was not the normal kind of anger he felt when someone verbally provoked him. You just want to use your fists to teach the person who said those words a lesson, and this anger is mixed with a little bit of smugness. You just want to vent your anger on another person, and not just use violence. After an awkward silence that lasted for who knows how long, Karl slowly stood up, tried his best to force a smile, looked at Professor Flitwick and said, I will try my best to consider your opinion. If there is nothing else, I will go back and rest. After saying that, he turned around neatly, as if he wanted to escape from here quickly, but he didn't take a few steps. Professor Flitwick stopped him. Wait a moment, Herr Hohenzollern, is there anything else, Professor Flitwick? Karl kept smiling, but the twitching corners of his eyes showed that he didn't seem so calm. Don't be so nervous, Mr. Hohenzollern. Professor Flitwick was a little embarrassed. I just want to talk to you about some details of the papers you asked me to do. The most crucial point is to engrave some ancient magic patterns on the Muggle mechanical equipment. I know you have mastered this unique technique when you made those amazing magic cards, but some of the magic needed to make the machine you imagined is not ordinary light magic. You need some very ancient magic. The magic pattern system engravings of these magics and ancient magic texts. Although I have some understanding, please allow me that my level is not high enough, so I can't ask you directly to solve this problem. Karl was silent. He had been worried about this before, but he always had a hopeful heart. After all, Hogwarts was the top school in the entire wizarding world. He thought he could get this knowledge for free, but it seems he still needs to compromise with the dog system. It seems that the realization of my ultimate wish will have to be delayed a little, and I won't be able to complete my revenge this Christmas. There's no need for you to be depressed. Just as Karl lowered his head in silence, Professor Flitwick's voice rang out again. I just said that I don't have the ability to solve it myself. It doesn't mean that there is no one in Hogwarts who can help you. Who? Karl looked up. Does that even need asking? Professor Flitwick showed an admiring expression. Of course it's Headmaster Dumbledore. In the study of ancient magic, there is no one better than Headmaster Dumbledore in the entire wizarding world. You are his ward, so just go and ask him directly. You can go see him, by the way. Having said this, Professor Flitwick quietly moved closer to Karl and spoke in a low voice. But before you go, you'd better prepare some gifts. Headmaster Dumbledore is very sorry that you haven't visited him for more than a month. She was very angry and kept complaining to me for more than an hour when I went to report the problem. Chapter 260 to Kevin Lestrang and -039 S misunderstanding and work report. How can you be so stingy? In the Hufflepuff common room, Cole was sitting on the sofa alone, worrying about his own mistakes. He had just returned from the headmaster's office. In that room, that stingy old deng spoke sarcastically as soon as he saw him. Isn't this the great Mr. Hohenzollern? Why don't you develop your organization and earn your money in school? Why are you interested in wasting your precious time today to come and visit your principal? I've made it clear in advance that I can't afford to compensate you for wasting all this time and the losses you've caused. Before he could even make a request, old Deng started to lecture him and then used magic to kick him out of the principal's office. Back in the Hufflepuff common room, Karl thought carefully about what he had done recently. I have indeed been a bit naughty recently, but I have done nothing but develop an organization within Hogwarts like Voldemort did. He robbed Gringotts Bank, placed his own people in the British Ministry of Magic, and threatened to manipulate the personnel arrangements of the Ministry of Magic. He attempted to interfere in the British Prime Minister election and turned 80% of Hogwarts property, except the castle, into personal property through various means. I didn't do anything excessive. Overall, I was a very obedient student who loved to study, respected teachers, and united with classmates. There is no need to get so angry and act as if you have done something wrong. Karl, who had completed the moral cycle in his mind, began to blame Dumbledore for being ungrateful and for his good intentions in preparing to give him some family love. He actually used morality to accuse himself, while on the other hand he said that love is the greatest magic in the world. On the other hand, he completely ignored my efforts. It's really double standard. It's all that old man's fault. There is absolutely no problem on my part. After emphasizing it several times in his mind, Karl couldn't help but sigh deeply. After all, even if the old man was wrong first, he had to ask him for help when it was time. He had just carefully studied Professor Flitwick's paper. It was discovered that in the manufacturing process of the magic lithography machine, its core optical components do require the support of ancient magic. So he tried to calm down and started thinking about what gift could make old Deng calm down. Generally speaking, cake is the best dish at this time, but he was troubled about choosing the flavor at this moment. Kevin Lestrange, a first-year student, ended his lunch break and prepared to go to the afternoon class. You're just in time. Karl called out to the other person, looked at his still cute face, and suddenly asked, if I want to apologize to someone, I'm going to give him a cake I made myself. If that person is you, what flavor do you think is best? What? Kevin Lestrange suddenly became nervous. His face looked extremely panicked, and his hands kept moving up and down. Why do you have such an idea? I just feel that I have been a little too indifferent to that person's feelings during this period of time. I want to ease the relationship between the two parties. Is that so? A barely perceptible surprise flashed across Kevin Lestrange's face, and his expression gradually became happy and proud. There's actually no need to hug or apologize or anything like that, and there's no need for gifts either. Just be fair and just. Being too partial is not good. But then again, if I have to give it as a gift, I would accept it. I like the refreshing smell of lemon and citrus. By the way, don't add so much sugar if you can. Is that so? Karl nodded slightly, smiled brightly and said gently, thank you for your valuable advice. It helps me a lot. It's okay. I can accept the apology. Kevin Lestrange muttered a few words under his breath, and then immediately left the common room. He came to a secluded corner of the corridor, took out a notebook he carried with him, and began to record everything. There was a work report written on the cover of the notebook, which was a record of Karl's daily behavior according to Grindelwald's request. Although it is called a work report, it is almost like a diary and a confession. Most of the above content is Saturday, September 9th. I spent a week with the Dumbledore heir. I have to admit that he is a very charming person. He's got this elegant eccentric demeanor, and one minute he could be writing letters to his congressman in gorgeous gothic script, and in the next second, he can drag me to play cards and remind me that his gambling skills are very superb. I lost 20 gold galleons at First glance, this work report seems relatively normal, but in the corner of this page, the author wrote in a very panicked handwriting, "My light, please forgive my fall. I have never seen a boy who can emit such an alluring light. Why are his arms and neck so smooth and beautiful?" As time goes by, this tone gradually increases. On September 9th, Dumbledore's heir and that damned idiot were working out in the room. I never imagined I would encounter such a scene. When the sweat flowed down the gaps between his muscles, that damn feeling came back to me. My light, please forgive me. At the same time, complaints about Cedric also occupy the vast majority of the article. On September 9th, I met the man in the room for the first time. He had a smell that I hated. This feeling is very subtle. It reminds me of a certain bastard wearing a mask. Their smell is very similar. Even his behavior is the same. Every move he makes reveals clumsiness and stupidity. I really don't understand why he could win the favor of Dumbledore's heir. On September 9th, I was a little overwhelmed. Although I was only undercover, my heart will always belong to my light. Even if you're playing a role, the unfair treatment you receive from being under the same roof still makes you angry. That damn annoying guy is simply a good for nothing. Dumbledore's heir has a habit. He would make 8 small cakes every night for the next day's breakfast and bring them into the room at night, in the third drawer on the left side of his desk, for whenever we fall asleep or that bastard works too late. He would steal those little cakes, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. I don't understand why he was stolen so many times. Dumbledore's heir, why don't you hide those cakes somewhere else? Could it be that being with someone for too long really affects each other's IQ? Chapter 263 CEDRIC and -039 S dissatisfaction. On September 9th, today, the doubts in my heart were finally answered, but the answer is even more infuriating. When I woke up this morning, I received a cake from Dumbledore's heir. I thought this was a reflection of my work. I had begun to get closer to him and would soon become his confidant, but he smiled and said to me, "Cedric has a poor appetite recently. If you don't mind, you can eat the remaining cake. It is shameful to waste food." At that time, my heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. With this feeling, I asked the questions in my heart. The answer I got was even more disturbing. The other party just smiled and shrugged his shoulders. Of course I knew there was a thief in my room, but I couldn't change the location where I hid the cake because he wouldn't be able to find it if I changed the location, and this was originally a reward for him. The reason we hid it from him was just to control the total amount. After all, if we told him, then these 8 cakes will be eaten up overnight. Now divide them into 2 portions, 4 in the morning and 4 in the evening, which is just right. Looking at that text, even now Kevin Lestrange can still understand the handwriting point. I could feel my anger at that moment, especially at the very end of the page, where I wrote with great force in a very eye-catching red pen, "Dumbledore's heir is a very biased bastard." Looking at these words, Kevin Lestrange couldn't help but smile. Then he took out the feather pen he carried with him and started today's work point written in flowing handwriting on a brand new blank page. On September 9th, before autumn was about to arrive, I finally got some good news. It seems that Dumbledore's heir is here. He had already recognized my abilities and was trying to make up for the mistakes he had made before. I forgave him very gracefully and generously, and I told them my taste, refreshing lemon and citrus, are definitely more attractive than cloyingly sweet passion fruit and strawberry, just like the difference in ability between the excellent me and that annoying guy. After writing it, Kevin Lestrange read it again and finally crossed out the title Dumbledore's heir with a pen point. It was changed to Cole without the last name suffix point. After finishing his work report, he walked towards the classroom for the afternoon class with a happy pace, and it happened to be Point at the end of the corridor. I just ran into that annoying guy Point. There was no verbal communication between the two people. Cedric just looked at the other person silently. He was really too tired now Point. After working overtime for several days, he had no energy to think about anything. All he wanted to do now was close his eyes. A computer screen will automatically appear in front of you with colorful codes on it. Point. Fortunately, he still had a small cake, and Karl hadn't discovered it yet. In fact, this was very normal. He was also very tired from work these days, which might have contributed to his memory loss. On the other side, Kevin Lestrange just raised his head and snorted coldly, like a rooster who had won the game. With a smug smile on his face, he walked away quickly. Arrived at the Hufflepuff common room, but there weren't many people in the common room now. Before entering Autumn, Hogwarts Castle, located in the Scottish Highlands, can still feel the heat at the end of summer. Most of the lower grade students who had classes in the afternoon had already gone to the classroom early, where the strange machine sponsored by Mr. Hohenzollern was installed. It can cool down the entire space. The name of this great machine seems to be air conditioner. Students from several colleges once jointly wrote a letter requesting that the dormitories be installed as well, but Professor McGonagall just left a cold response: "You have to fight for your rights. During the midterm test before Christmas, each of you students in your grade will take it. Everyone is eligible to fight for this right for classmates of the same grade in college. No one can get any benefits from the college out of thin air." Upon hearing this, the students of Ravenclaw House were particularly happy, while the students of Slytherin House did not care at all. Anyway, most of them are very rich and can pay for the installation in their own dormitories. The students of Hufflepuff House were wailing. Before, they still had Cedric as their trump card, but judging from his current attendance in class, I'm afraid it's impossible to get the first place in the grade. After all, Professor Mike left a special message when he said this: "Mr. Hohenzollern's results are not recorded in the rankings. He does not need this encouragement. As for the Gryffindor students, he didn't know much about them. He only knew that the girl named Hermione had recently become the school's key protected animal." Thinking about this, Cedric walked towards his dormitory. He didn't have classes in the afternoon, but he couldn't rest because he had a job. There are still more than 600 projects and requirements that have not been completed, and there are still more than 300 bugs in the code that have not been fixed a few days ago. When he thought of this, he couldn't help scratching his head. What was even more annoying was that there was still the smell of that guy in the room. Karl is just biased. He only sleeps on a simple folding bed, so why should he sleep on a single bed made of solid wood? And why doesn't he have to work overtime? They were supposed to be members of the same organization, but in the end he is the only one who suffers. That guy often laughed at himself, saying that he was a fool who understood nothing about politics. He was the fool, a fool whose identity was exposed as soon as he entered the school. Cedric was madly complaining about Kevin Lestrange in his mind, without noticing that Cole was sitting on the sofa at the door of the dormitory. It was not until he took out his wand and prepared to enter the dormitory that Carl's voice sounded behind him. "I called you so many times. Why didn't you answer me, Mr. Cedric Diggory? Are you really dissatisfied with me?" "No." Cedric turned around and said perfunctorily with a pout, "How dare I be dissatisfied with my own boss? I'm very grateful to you for giving me this meaningful job so that I can face the setbacks in my future life. I have a strong heart 50 years in advance. I'm very grateful to you." "Thank you." "Okay, shut up." Karl glared at the other person fiercely, then sighed lightly and asked helplessly, "If I want to apologize to someone, I'm going to give him a cake I made myself. If that person is you, what flavor do you think is best?" Chapter 264 CEDRICN-039 S Revenge Book. There was a look of shock on Cedric's face for a second, and then it immediately turned into unconcealable surprise. He tried hard to control his emotions, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but rise, so he could only turn his head away. In order to avoid letting the other party see the expression on his face, he deliberately lowered his voice and spoke. "I think it's better to apologize with words first. Giving gifts right away seems a bit coercive. If someone truly realizes their mistake, they should first apologize sincerely with words and then be forgiven. Let's discuss the gift again." Well, said, "Stop talking." Carol interrupted him and continued to sit alone on the sofa thinking silently. "I haven't finished yet." Cedric turned around angrily. "We haven't even finished expressing our opinions yet. You're being rude. Don't you know that?" "I don't need your opinion," Karl said calmly. "I already knew your taste. I shouldn't have asked you before. You should get back to work and finish writing the program before the end of October. Otherwise your performance and bonus will be deducted. By the way, since you invested so much in your broomstick, you bought a lot of meaningless merchandise. This has exceeded the scope of the endorsement contract we signed, and your debt has now accumulated to a certain extent. If you don't get some extra income by the end of next month, you're going to be in a very awkward position, so I suggest you get to work as soon as possible. You, Cedric, pointed at Carol angrily, but found that the other party ignored him. He was just half lying on the sofa, pinching his fingers as if calculating something. You biased, annoying bastard. 5 full minutes passed like this. Feeling ignored, Cedric suddenly yelled and ran into the dormitory alone, slamming the door shut. What did I do wrong again? The force with which the door closed startled Karl, who was sitting on the sofa. He turned his head to look at the damaged door, confusion written all over his face point, but he did not hesitate. After a brief thought, he stood up and walked towards the Hogwarts kitchen point in the dormitory. Cedric sat alone behind his desk, taking deep breaths. Then he took out a red notebook from the deep of the drawer of his desk, opened it vigorously, took out a feather pen, and began to record. This notebook is his diary, or to put it another way, it can be regarded as a catalogue of Karl's crimes, because most of the above content is such as, on Saturday, September 9th, Karl invented a new card game that can be played by 3 people. In the beginning, I teamed up with him and won 50 gold galleons from that damn annoying guy. In the end, the other party shamelessly accused me of cheating. The key point was that Karl sided with him. In the end, it became 2 of them against me. I ended up losing 60 galleons, which made my already embarrassing debt even worse. This account must be attributed to Karl. On September 9th, that annoying guy was not only annoying to watch, but also rude. I was working out with Karl at the time. I was almost exhausted, and this guy broke into the dormitory without knocking. There must be something wrong with his eyes. I was looking at things I shouldn't have been looking at. Karl must take the main responsibility for this. He could have stopped it all. As Cedric looked through these numerous crimes, he became furious, and the more he read, the angrier he became. Just like the words in the notebook. Every stroke of the pen and every letter reveals the author's resentment at the time. September 9th. Today is a miserable and infuriating day. I have been working alone in the dormitory for an entire afternoon. I even worked overtime until 9 PM, but I didn't see Carol and that annoying guy until I walked out of the dormitory. Carol and that annoying guy have been chatting in the cafeteria. They also had a complicated and exquisite French meal. I'm not a big fan of the slow serving and small portions of food, but this shouldn't be a reason to hide it. I decided not to talk to Karl for a whole night and to eat an extra cake. This is the only thing that has made me happy in the past 2 weeks. Karl didn't find out where he hid the cake. It seems that Mr. Hohenzollern is not so smart sometimes. Asterisk carrot carrot asterisk. Looking at the records of that day, Cedric felt a little better, but only for a moment. As the diary record date came to September 9th, just by looking at the handwriting, one could begin to feel the author's anger at the time. September 9th was the most painful day in my life. That day was the Chinese breakfast day that all Hogwarts students looked forward to the most. On that morning, the house elves of Hogwarts will bring all the carefully prepared Chinese breakfasts to the table at once, as a reward to the students and professors who have worked hard for a whole month. At the end of the month, the breakfast is extremely rich. My favorites are crab roe soup dumplings, crystal crab dumplings, steamed chicken feet with soy sauce, as well as spare ribs, and glutinous rice chicken. I was very happy that day. Delicious food can soothe people's souls the most. But I didn't remember the amount correctly. After eating 3 baskets of crab soup dumplings, 2 servings of crystal crab dumplings, 1 serving of steamed chicken feet with soy sauce, and 3 servings of pork ribs, and glutinous rice with chicken, my stomach can no longer hold any more food, so I'm going to save the remaining small cake for dessert at noon. But before this idea was realized, Carol actually gave the little cake to that annoying guy. I had a cordial conversation with him for quite a while. I didn't argue with him, or I didn't even have the energy to argue at that time. That feeling of being powerless and full of anger at the same time is really unpleasant. When writing this, the author at the time probably still felt that it was not enough to vent his anger, so he wrote another line of eye-catching red text below. Karl Hohenzollern is a very biased bastard. After carefully recalling the crimes he had committed and the disregard he had just suffered. Cedric, filled with anger, filled the quill in his hand with ink. Write it down forcefully on a brand new page. On September 9th, when the fruit trees in the academy were about to ripen, the arrogant Mr. Hohenzollern, he seems to have finally realized his mistakes and is willing to lower his proud head to serve as a friend rather than a leader. Confess your faults to others. Chapter 265, The Art of Completion. Although his attitude was still arrogant and unpleasant, I still gave him valuable advice very professionally. Even if he didn't accept it, it didn't matter. I wasn't angry at him for ignoring it, but if he still uses margarine and diet sugar in his cakes, I will not accept his apology. This is a matter of principle and cannot be shaken. I hope his attitude will be better when he apologizes. The obnoxious Mr. Hohenzollern. At the end, Cedric crossed out the last title Mr. Hohenzollern and rewrote the name Karl. There was just a big question mark written in red ink behind the name. Before I'm forgiven, I will temporarily forgive you half of it. I hope to make up the remaining 50% as soon as possible. Cedric muttered to himself as he looked at his journal. Then he carefully put his notebook back into the secret box in the drawer and then opened the laptop in front of him. Take a deep breath and draw. Come to the damn work and let's fight it out. Waiting and working are the most difficult times, but they can be happy times or tormenting times. Everything will inevitably come to an end as the last ray of sunlight disappears behind the horizon. Hogwarts Castle finally welcomed his night. In the dormitory, Cedric had lost count of how many times he had done so. Glancing furtively at the desk, there lay a medium-sized delicate cake, emitting an intense scent of lemon and citrus. At around 5 p.m., Karl returned to the dormitory with a perfectly baked cake base. The golden surface of the cake exudes the aroma of milk and wheat, and Karl uses his dexterous hands like an artist. Apply a thin layer of white cream on the entire surface of the cake. Then a layer of transparent and chewy light yellow jam like jelly covered every corner of the cake like magic. Use golden citrus jam to draw exquisite patterns on the cake. The fresh fragrance filled the entire dormitory, but it made Cedric's face more and more ugly, and the sound of typing on the keyboard became gradually more violent. Looking at the animal cream and honey jam, I can only forgive 35%. Cedric was calculating silently in his mind as he wrote the code. At the same time, he looked at the boy sitting on the solid wooden single bed on the other side. He seemed to be writing some information and looked very serious, but that was an illusion. He had discovered more than once that the other person's eyes were focused on the finished cake. There was a hint of disgusting smugness in the depths of his eyes. Keep being so proud, you bastard. The more excited you are now, the more frustrated you will be later. I really want to see your expression later, Cedric whispered silently in his mind with the greatest malice he could imagine. On the other side, Kevin Lestrange smelled the pleasant fragrance as soon as he entered the dormitory. He didn't expect that Karl would choose the dormitory as the place to apologize, although his education told him so. This was not a good thing to do, but it did not prevent him from staring at Cedric, who was typing on the computer with a smug look while he was working seriously. Useless trash. Today you will experience what true cruelty is. The gap in ability between you and me is irreparable. I will complete the task assigned to me by my master and become the most capable subordinate of Dumbledore's heir. Just like the reality that will happen in the future. The only person who can stand beside my light is me. You will eventually become a stepping stone to my victory, just like that masked loser. Kevin Lestrange thought proudly that perhaps because he was in a better mood, he wrote the report much faster. It's so quiet. Karl couldn't help but sigh as he felt the silence around him. Ever since this Lestrange joined his dormitory. The room had never been so quiet. Cedric and the other party quarreled almost every day. From the decoration style of the room, favorite colors, favorite flowers, To the evaluation of the dishes, all topics cannot be reasons for them to quarrel. Moreover, there is one thing that the two of them have in common when they quarrel, that is, they are never aggressive, but always reveal a sarcastic and sour taste. What's even more annoying is that every time an argument ends, the topic is always brought back to me, and I have to make the decision myself. Thinking of these headache-inducing memories, Karl couldn't help feeling helpless and stopped the work at hand. He snapped his fingers lightly with his right hand, and there was a burst of air, and two house elves suddenly appeared in the dormitory. One was holding a flower pot and the other was holding a tray. There was a strawberry planted in a flower pot, and it had already borne fruit. However, compared to other common strawberries, the fruit growing on this strawberry vine was different. It was not the common bright red, but a light pink, and on the other tray, there were several plump passion fruits. This smell. Cedric, who had been typing code, sniffed it lightly and turned his head to look. When I first saw those pink strawberries, my expression became visibly happy. Rose. Pink. Looks like there's a second generation product, he murmured softly. The name he mentioned, the naming of this strawberry variety, originated from a plan of Karl. When this guy took his first herbal medicine class, he looked at those exotic herbs with shining eyes, as if he had seen golden coins. He pulled Professor Sprout aside to discuss the matter when the get out of class was over. Finally, at the beginning of this year's school, the implementation of the magic plant economic package was announced. Utilizing various strange magical plants, we cultivate various plant products that have never been seen in the world of matter. For example, there are tulips that never wither as long as they are watered, or various large fruits. The most special of them is the flagship product that Karl calls the dog-licking economy. These include expensive but impractical varieties of roses, and this pink strawberry. He once had the chance to taste one, and compared to ordinary strawberries, this one was more like cream with a fruity texture. It was very sweet, and sweeted his taste, but he wanted to continue tasting it. Carol stopped him rudely, and said with a squint, "In the past 5 seconds, you have eaten 5 of them, worth 2 gold galleons. If you want to eat more, go to the front and pay." He was so angry at the time that he recorded this incident in great detail in his notebook when he came back. But now, Karl carefully selected a huge rose pink number 2 and decorated the top of the entire cake. At the same time, cut 2 passion fruits and place them on both sides of the cake. When these 2 points are completed, this great work of art is finally completed. Carol nodded with satisfaction, but just as he picked up the cake, he heard 2 voices of people standing up at the same time behind him. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 266. 2 heartbroken people and that dear old man. Are you 2 okay? Karl looked back at the 2 people who suddenly stood up, confusion written all over his face. But when he raised the question, the 2 people who stood up did not speak, but looked at each other with a smug and slightly happy look. Looking at the 2 puzzled people, Karl shook his head helplessly. You 2 should stop arguing. Our new product will be released in less than a month. Cedric, hurry up and develop the system and the adaptation software. Mr. Lestrange, please continue to organize the information about the members of parliament in the British general election. I hope that in this dormitory, I will no longer hear meaningless quarrels like today. Thank you for your hard work. I have something to do tonight. You should go to bed early. After saying this, Karl left the dormitory with a cake in his hand until the door of the dormitory was closed. The 2 people behind him were still standing there. The early autumn wind blew from the window onto the 2 young men, as if bringing the chill of winter. There was no argument or movement, just like they had just stood up at the same time. The 2 teenagers turned around and lowered their heads at the same time, then returned to their beds, lay down and covered their heads with a quilt. Karl's wish seemed to have come true, and the entire dormitory was now eerily quiet. On the other side, Karl used Phoenix apparition to go directly to the principal's office. As soon as he landed, he looked around and saw Dumbledore who usually greeted professors and students with a smile. Behind the headmaster's desk he was sitting there with his back to him. His fiery red hair and his back made him look like a red panda sulking because he didn't get to eat his apple. What? A stingy old man. Karl muttered softly and took out the last remaining rose pink language strawberry from his pocket. He fed the phoenix that brought him here, stroking its back feathers and thanking it softly. Thank you, Celestia. Go play with Fox. It'll give us some time alone. Celestia comes from the Latin word celestis, which means sky or firmament. Unlike in the past, when the phoenix was used as a resurrection armor shield, this big bird now has another use. Although this guy is still very greedy and often steals Leo Deng's fox snacks, he has already achieved nirvana. This phoenix, which has no genetic defects, will not gain weight endlessly like before. Instead, its body shape will become more graceful. Spreading its wings and flying higher like a burning flame. It is enough to amaze all wizards. Putting aside the phoenix's combat effectiveness, owning a pet like this can also strengthen one's own character positioning. As long as this big bird is summoned, no wizard will doubt his identity as Dumbledore's successor. That's why Karl gave it such a high sounding name, to enhance the style of this big bird. After all, if other wizards discovered that this big bird had nothing special except that it loved snacks and was even afraid of thunder, then your own image may also be shattered. After sending away the two troublesome birds, Karl, carrying the carefully prepared cake, quietly approached Dumbledore, who had his back to him. Without saying hello, he placed the cake on the desk, stepped aside to the old man's chair, and brewed a full pot of black tea. I continued to work while waiting silently, and by the way, I felt a gift I bought for the old man. Saying that you don't care at all and have never given any gifts are just lies. Just like that, in the magnificent principal's office, a young boy was lying on the old man's recliner. I was rocking in the recliner while drinking black tea and reading the report. Behind the desk on the other side, a rebellious old man sat with his back to the door, his back straight. The posture is so standard that it looks like a sculpture. The quiet time passed slowly, and the strange wall clock hanging among a pile of portraits made a ticking sound. Karl had no intention of apologizing or speaking, and Dumbledore didn't seem to intend to forgive him either, and kept his back to him. But as the second hand went around and around, the small cake on the desk slowly disappeared visibly. It was like being gnawed slowly by an invisible mouse until 20 minutes later Karl finished the pot of black tea, stood up leisurely from the recliner, walked to the desk, and leaned against it slightly. Well, dear mother, now that you have eaten the cake and enjoyed the company of your loved ones, it is time for us to get down to business. I didn't eat it, and I don't intend to forgive you. Not only are you not allowed in the headmaster's office as a student, I will be deducting Hufflepuff house points. Dumbledore did not turn around and still had his back to Karl. Seeing that the other party had eaten and refused to admit it, Karl did not get angry. He just cleaned the table silently while speaking intentionally or unintentionally. Okay, you haven't forgiven me. I'm a bastard who has committed heinous crimes and has been rebellious and evil since childhood. I robbed Gringotts, using magic in front of muggles, and even planning to interfere with muggle society. I'm the terminator of the entire wizarding world. He will destroy the 1000-year balance between the wizarding world and the muggle world. He is a complete bastard, a piece of trash without parents. Don't say any more. Dumbledore finally turned around, with anger in his eyes and cream at the corners of his mouth. A pair of eyes were fixed on the young man in front of him. Even though he was known as the greatest and most intelligent wizard in the British wizarding world, faced with Karl's so-called admission of fault, he had to break down his defense and stared at him with helplessness written all over his face. What do you want to do? Are you criticizing yourself or insinuating something when you say this? Take back what you just said. You must realize your mistake. Your current behavior is extremely dangerous, even more dangerous than Voldemort. If he is a madman who wants to rule the British wizarding world, then you want to burn the entire wizarding world to ashes. It's the old world. Watch your words. Karl had a warm smile on his face, but his tone was very firm. I am indeed prepared to burn the entire wizarding world to the ground, but my actions are fundamentally different from that psychopath. He is a pure destroyer who only uses violence to kill without reason, but I'm completely different. I burned the entire old world, but I will also build a brand new magical world from the ashes of the old world. Wizards only know how to use magic to show their superiority, but I can use magic to change the entire world. An entire planet with billions of people. Isn't this greater than any magic? Chapter 267. Family Apology in the Little Bastard and -039. Deal. This, Dumbledore wanted to refute, but when he opened his mouth, no word came out. There was no way in his past life. He had also seen countless magical geniuses, and without exception, they all had an extraordinary pursuit for powerful magic. But the goal they pursue is often just personal strength. But Karl in front of them is completely different. When I talked to him about the pursuit of power and wealth, he directly raised the scope to the entire magical world, and even the entire world. When we communicated in the past, this little bastard would often speak to me with a look of contempt. Open your mind. Open your mind a little, my dear headmaster. Your thinking seems to be stuck in the last century. As a typical example, the thinking of the entire wizarding world also seems to be stuck in the last century. The powerful black magic is indeed exciting, and the pursuit of eternal life sounds very attractive, but the pattern is a little too small. Let me read you a passage that I like very much. The most precious thing in life is life, which is given to us only once. When we look back on the past, we will not regret wasting our years, nor will we be ashamed of doing nothing, so that when he was dying, he could say, my entire life and all my energy have been dedicated to the most magnificent cause in the world, the struggle for human liberation. Of course I'm not that great, and cannot fight for the liberation of all mankind. I'm mainly fighting for my own interests, but we can always change things, just like you think when you're young, doing nothing and giving everything, just to maintain the current situation. The final result is that you lose everything and cannot change anything. The world is moving, even if the rules are chaotic, but I believe that the world will eventually rush towards an ultimate goal. No one can stop this change. You can persist for 10 years, 20 years, or even half a century, but so what? History has its own laws. The only constant is change. 10,000 years is too long. It is time to act today. At the time, this sentence sounded like nothing more than a young and frivolous child's feeling that the world was destined to be his, just some boring big talk point. But a year has passed, and I have seen what has happened in the British wizarding world, and in Hogwarts he finally realized that the boy was not bragging. He was indeed pushing his ideas forward step by step. He wants to change the world. When the other party said these words again today, the greatest wizard in the magical world understood for the first time what it meant to have a broader vision, and for the first time felt what it meant to have nothing to say. Karl, who was sitting opposite him, cleaned up the table and looked at Dumbledore in silence. There was no sarcasm or ridicule. He just spoke calmly. I know what you are recalling now, and I also know that you may still be unwilling to help me now. I don't blame you. This cake is just an apology from my family. Please forgive me for what I have done, and stop being sad and angry about what I have done, because your sadness and anger will make me feel bad too. What? Dumbledore looked at Karl in surprise, his eyes full of disbelief. Karl just waved his hand slightly, with a warm smile on his face, and said in a half-joking tone, don't doubt your ears. You are not that old yet, even though there are too many titles and adjectives applied to me now. What a greedy devil, what a hidden dark lord, but no one can deny that I'm just a human being. As a human being, you have feelings. I have never forgotten your protection and love for me. You are one of the few people I care about in this world. I naturally don't want you to be sad or angry. This is just out of my emotional needs. Dumbledore was silent, an indescribable feeling of guilt rising in his heart, but just as he was about to apologize, that little bastard seemed to be able to see through his heart. Suddenly, his demeanor changed, and he became so nonchalant that it was irritating to look at. He slammed a large document on the desk and said with disdain, okay, the family drama is over. Let's talk business now, since you're not willing to compromise for me in terms of your relationship. Very Good then, let's solve this problem in the fairest way possible. I'll make you a deal. With his guilt gone, and less than 2 seconds to live, Dumbledore stared at Karl sideways without a moment's hesitation. He waved his hand hurriedly to drive him away. Get out of my office. You are not welcome here. I will never make any deal with you again. Leave right now. Really? Karl didn't take that kind of steps, but just showed his signature smirk and stood there quietly staring at the other person. Dumbledore suddenly felt that something was wrong and quickly picked up the documents on the table and began to look through them carefully. As I read further, the old face became darker and darker, and it looked like he was about to have a cerebral hemorrhage. Carol just stood quietly by and spoke nonchalantly. This is a very confidential document. It contains all the loans made by the first savings bank in the entire wizarding world since its establishment nearly a year ago. I didn't expect that wizards in the British wizarding world would have such a strong desire to consume. Or was it because they had too few products to choose from before? This growth rate is indeed a little beyond my expectations, even if I don't have any financial knowledge, even an old man. Like you can see the huge crisis hidden in such a simple report. How much time is left? Dumbledore asked with a dark face. How much time is left to save? If this trend continues, the first wave of large-scale debt defaults will arrive after the Christmas holidays. It should be less than 4 months. I will go to the British Ministry of Magic immediately. They have a hidden fund that should be able to resolve this situation. Dumbledore stood up immediately, with a rare look of anxiety on his face. Karl had no intention of stopping the other party, but after Dumbledore left his seat, he sat down in the seat of the Hogwarts principal. Looking at the other person's back, he said casually, "You are talking about the wealth hidden in the underground vault of the Ministry of Magic. I know that the amount of money is quite considerable. It's a pity that you seem to be a little late. This money should be used to buy new magical weapons and equipment immediately. It is used to arm the Aura team that performed poorly during the Gringotts robbery. If I'm not mistaken, they should be holding a financial meeting now." Chapter 268 Questions from Past Principals. Don't tell me it's to buy those magic guns and ammo of yours. Dumbledore walked to the gate, turned around and looked at Karl sitting in the headmaster's seat, and asked with a glimmer of hope. Karl crossed his arms, straightened his back, and tried to make himself look more like the owner of the room. He spoke with a serious expression, and in a relaxed manner. Of course, as a government agency in the British wizarding world, we have to deal with extremely vicious criminals and an increasingly complex security environment. Security is one of their most important responsibilities. I designed a defense plan for the first savings bank of the wizarding world. The results are obvious to all. This is a reasonable transaction, with excellent products and customers who need it. It can be regarded as a specimen of economics. You are committing a crime. According to the British law I know, selling guns and ammunition is a felony. Dumbledore still refused to give up, and continued to argue. But I'm a wizard, right? Karl smiled. Using magic to transform creations from the Muggle world is also a serious crime in the wizarding world. Dumbledore roared. But no society can directly deprive its members of the right to defend their wealth. The only difference here is the means. The legal documents in this regard are very vague and have long been reviewed by professionals. What's more, this batch of purchases comes from the British Ministry of Magic. As long as they sign and approve the financial plan, your accusation will be resolved. The scope of the attack will be extended to all auras in the entire British wizarding world. Do you want to destroy the foundation of the entire British wizarding world? Karl answered calmly. Dumbledore was so angry that his face darkened, and he went from being on the verge of a cardiovascular disease to looking like he was about to have a stroke. He was now standing at the door of the principal's office, the lowest place in the entire room, while Carol was sitting behind the principal's desk. Sitting at the highest point of the entire room, he looked down at the other person with a grin on his face, which made him look like he deserved a beating. Even the surrounding oil paintings could not be tolerated. An old man with a bad temper grabbed the picture frame and shouted loudly, "Don't go too far, kid. It's not your turn to sit in that position yet. Why are you talking to the principal in that tone? If I was still alive, you would have been thrown into a dungeon and hung up and beaten. Principal Blake, right? Karl looked at the mean old man in the picture frame, smiled and spoke slowly in a respectful tone. I heard that you are from Slytherin House and a member of the noble black family, so you should not blame me for what I did, because I'm doing this in the spirit of Slytherin House, and I'm performing a feat that no great wizard before me has ever accomplished. In a unique way, the entire magical world is at your fingertips. After that, he ignored Dumbledore, who was so angry that his face turned dark, and started chatting with the headmaster, who was known as the worst headmaster in the history of Hogwarts. Used concise and clear language to tell the other party how you used inventions, monopoly operations, and financial fraud to reap the wealth of the entire British wizarding world. Once again, he used the opponent's force to his advantage and played the cowardly and incompetent British Ministry of Magic into his own hands. Basically, he said everything he should and shouldn't say, except that he didn't admit on the spot that he pretended to be Peter Pettigrew and robbed Gringotts a set of theoretical knowledge that had never been heard before, coupled with Karl's full-level talent for public speaking, made the old man in the picture frame stunned. Even other deceased principals left their own frames and came to the frame of Principal Blake to listen to Karl's speech. That's what I did anyway. I didn't need violence, but I could get everything I wanted. Karl finished his speech. You are truly a born badass vampire. How could Slytherin House have such a student? Compared to you, little Tom is as pure as a white lotus. After about half a minute of silence, Principal Black also gave his own evaluation point, but Karl just smiled and shook his head. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Headmaster Black. I'm a student of Hufflepuff House. What? The mean old man in the picture frame screamed, without noticing that the other principals were standing behind him. I shouted out loud subconsciously, how could that glutton academy possibly have a student like you? Who are you calling the gluttonous academy? A chubby looking lady picked up a gun and a mean old man and yelled loudly. What followed was a burst of violence. The lady looked chubby and cute like a panda, but when she fought, she was as ferocious as a bear with just a few punches. The mean old man was beaten so hard that he saw stars. After teaching him a lesson, the plump lady walked to the front of the crowd, looked at Karl, and said in a gentle tone, Mr. Hohenzollern, right? We have seen you here many times. You were just having a quarrel with Dumbledore. It's really frustrating for Albus. We never knew there were so many things happening in the British wizarding world. I have been lost for too long to judge your behavior, but I must remind you, my dear child, if you use any means necessary to achieve your goal, you will lose a lot in the process. You should preserve the kindness in your heart, of course, my dear lady. Karl responded with a warm smile and then began to introduce her. He used her biology and plant magic, combined with the biological science of the Muggle world, to develop a variety of new fruits and flowers. He even brought a few real objects for demonstration, including pink strawberries and fiery roses that never fade. He explained all the oil paintings with enthusiasm, just like he was selling a product to others. Ma'am, I know you will definitely be dissatisfied with my behavior towards my wealth last year, but just like magic, it is just a high-level equal exchange. Everything has its two sides. I'm also working hard to bring some beautiful things to this somewhat lifeless magical world. Just as flowers need to grow at night, we cannot only care about the beautiful side, but are unwilling to accept its ugly side. You are a good boy. Without a moment's hesitation, after listening to Karl's speech and seeing the beautiful flowers and rare fruits with his own eyes, the plump lady immediately gave her approval. After her, other former principals who graduated from the other two colleges immediately ran over and were ready to question the young man. During the process, there was the hot-tempered Gryffindor headmaster and the Ravenclaw headmaster, who looked like a scholar and spoke in a unique and sarcastic tone. They almost got into a fight over who should ask the question first, but finally, at the suggestion of the Ravenclaw headmaster, he asked the question first. After asking the questions, I will help him catch the Slytherin headmaster Black and have him beat him up to vent his anger on the other side. He looked at the bastard boy who was sitting on his principal's throne and happily chatting with a group of principals. Dumbledore's heart skipped a beat. It's over. This is a preparation for usurping the throne in advance. I may really have to retire early. Chapter 269 Dumbledore finally compromises. With this thought in mind, Dumbledore wanted to interrupt the conversation, but found that he couldn't get a word in. Even making the slightest sound would result in a scolding. It seemed that in these few minutes, no one in the room, except myself, remembered that I was the owner of this office. He was the headmaster of Hogwarts, not that little bastard sitting in the headmaster's seat. But this silent cry could only remain in his heart. And he could only watch the little bastard. He introduced to several former headmasters from Ravenclaw his own transformation of optical magic and his idea of using magic to transform human machines. Several former headmasters from Gryffindor will talk about their understanding of sacrifice and courage. Karl didn't need to use too many philosophical theories. He just needed to imagine himself as the male protagonist in some hot-blooded anime he had watched in his previous life. Those childish lines, spoken in a performative tone, are enough to make these long gone lines. I wish I could pull out the arrow myself to vent my anger. 10 minutes passed in a flash, and he easily gained the approval of all the principal's paintings in the principal's office. Even the fat lady couldn't help but straighten her back and slightly raise her chin, looking proud in front of everyone. The principals of other colleges also cast envious expressions, as did Principal Blake, who was the first to speak and ask questions. He did not mean to praise Karl at all, because he was still being pinned to the ground and beaten by the Gryffindor headmaster. After dealing with the relationship between his future colleagues, Karl looked at Dumbledore, who was desperate. Pretend like you just remembered it. I'm sorry, my dear principal. It seems that our conversation is not over yet. I was just enjoying the conversation so much that I ignored your presence, but I believe that with your heart as broad as the ocean, you will definitely not blame me. At the same time, these 10 minutes are just enough for you to think calmly. Are you willing to cooperate with me? As long as you agree, I can help you deal with the next crisis that may occur in the British wizarding world. Absolutely not. Dumbledore gritted his teeth, his eyes fixed on the boy in front of him. He didn't hate Carol very much, although this little bastard was very rebellious and shameless. Overall, at least personally, he liked this child. But he just couldn't accept it. He had lived for more than a century, but he was still being controlled by this little bastard. This feeling of being controlled is very uncomfortable, especially with that annoying smile on the other person's face. Just like that old asshole I was on vacation with during the summer vacation. It's fine that I can't get the upper hand over him. The old ones can't win and are controlled by the younger ones. It makes people angry just thinking about it. On the other side, Karl saw that the other party rejected him again, so he continued to speak calmly with the same expression as before, pretending to remember something. Oh, by the way, in addition to the funds hidden by the British Ministry of Magic, I remember there should be another sum of money available to deal with these crises, half of Gringotts' wealth. If you think about it carefully, you can at least settle your current accounts with this money. It seems that the money is kept in your old house. You can use it anytime you want. No need to thank me for reminding you. This is what I should do. Just tell me when someone asks, after you use it. Dear Headmaster Dumbledore, where did you get so much money? Where did such a huge amount of funds come from? If these questions can be effectively answered, I think there shouldn't be any problem. At the same time, I completely trust you, the greatest white wizard in the magic world of the Kingdom of Hell. The most intelligent headmaster of Hogwarts will surely be able to come up with a solution. Arsehole, such an arsehole. This arsehole who got the advantage, but still acts cute is exactly the same. Dumbledore looked at Karl, who was moved by his own performance and couldn't help but complain in his heart. But Karl seemed to have thought of something and continued speaking as usual. But if you think about it carefully, this does not solve the crisis. It just delays the crisis. Even if you don't understand, I still want to say that the fundamental reason why this crisis broke out is nothing more than the growing material and cultural needs of wizards in the magical world. The fundamental contradiction with its slow growing wages can be summed up in 6 words. Too little. To simply use external forces to smooth out bad debts without adjusting the distribution structure is like adding fuel to the fire. But If we want so many people to have their incomes increase at the same time, there must be enough jobs and enough industries. I wonder who in the British wizarding world can provide so many jobs and build an industrial structure of such a scale. Dumbledore was silent. He had to admit that he had not thought about it so much before. He also knew that he had been defeated miserably today, and it was impossible for him to refute the friend in front of him. The other party's reasons are impeccable, or that's what they say. When the conflict develops to a certain stage point, the contradiction will transform and intensify, and attempts will be made to escape the contradiction or return to the state before the contradiction occurred. All of these will become foolish behaviors that are in vain. The law of development of things is always spiral upward. If we go backwards in history, we will eventually be crushed by the wheels of history. He sighed deeply, turned around and went to his desk, took out the Elder Wand, and tapped a corner of the desk. Like a drop of water falling into the water. After a wave of magical ripples, a pile of scrolls written on parchment appeared in front of the two. Dumbledore gently pushed the scrolls in front of Karl and said helplessly with his head down, "Take it. This is what you want. Have you been prepared for this?" Karl looked at the parchment scrolls and did not open them immediately. He asked with some confusion, "Then, why do you have to act so tough?" "I can't explain it clearly." Dumbledore slowly raised his head, looked into Karl's eyes, and said in a somewhat tragic tone, "Maybe I'm really unwilling to accept this. You know, I've lived for a very long time. It seems that all old people in the world have this feeling. When the world is no longer what you know it to be, they will instinctively fear and resist it. I used to laugh at the idea that, as long as they didn't accept it, the world would go back to the way it was when they were young. But when it really happened to me, I was just as stupid as them." After that, Dumbledore picked up a roll of parchment and handed it to Karl solemnly. "The world is now in your hands." Looking at the parchment in his hand, Cole was suddenly moved, and he just wanted to comfort Dumbledore. But before he could open his mouth, the old man came out and changed the subject, revealing a gossipy smile. "Okay, enough of the serious stuff. Let's talk about this cake. You've solved my problem, but I'm afraid you're in big trouble, Mr. Hohenzollern." Chapter 270, The Third Idiot. "What do you mean by that?" Karl looked at the smiling old man in front of him warily. Dumbledore was in no hurry to explain. He just gestured slightly for the other party to get up and give him his seat. After sitting back in the principal's seat, he deliberately used a serious tone, imitating Karl's previous confident and under control look. Pointing at the empty plate, he analyzed slowly, "I am very satisfied with this cake. I can see that you put a lot of thought into it, but this cake is not the same flavor as the one you made for me before." The refreshing lemon and citrus flavors, coupled with the strawberry and passion fruit presentation, made it clear this was intentional. "But from what I understand, you don't like this taste. You like fine wine and coffee, and as for candy, you prefer dark chocolate. You have a terrible tooth for sweets, so this isn't made to your taste. Considering you don't have many real friends at Hogwarts, then these two flavors can only come from the two people who are closest to you, Mr. Lestrange and our lovely Mr. Diggory." Having said that, Dumbledore deliberately paused and looked at the young man in front of him with a smile. Karl fell into deep thought. What the other party said was right. The two flavors did come from those two guys, but he still hadn't figured out what kind of trouble this would bring him, so he spoke calmly. "Keep talking. It seems that you also have a dull side." Dumbledore showed a sincere smile. "I think you know Mr. Diggory's words very well, but how did you know Mr. Lestrange's taste? Obviously you asked him questions. At the same time, given your personality, you obviously wouldn't deliberately hide anything from them, or beat around the bush and say some boring things. I guess you would just tell the other person that you want to apologize to someone, so you're going to make a cake and then ask the other person what they like, right?" "You guessed right." Karl nodded slightly, then asked with a puzzled look on his face, "I asked my classmates for their opinions. What kind of trouble will this bring me? Isn't it wrong to ask questions and communicate normally?" "Of course there is no problem with normal inquiries and exchanges. Dumbledore smiled even more happily. But if you add the previous questions, there will be problems, especially from what I heard from Professor McGonagall, your two roommates don't get along very well. You are in this middle position. Do you deliberately favor anyone? If so, that's fine. What kind of bullshit theory is this? Cole was even more confused and said unhappily, why should I be partial to one of them? Isn't it better to mediate and do things impartially? Partiality is not a quality a leader should have. Of course, my dear child. Dumbledore smiled from ear to ear, looking at the boy in front of him who had not yet reacted. He was so happy that the feeling of resentment that he had just felt like being held in someone's hands disappeared without a trace at this moment. At the same time, he finally understood why that old bastard and the little bastard in front of him liked to play with and manipulate others so much. The feeling of fooling others is really wonderful. With such a mood, he spoke earnestly, as a leader, it is an excellent quality to not favor anyone, but you have to remember, Kit, no one is the absolute leader in a relationship. It means that there is no such thing as mediation in a relationship. You are blatantly favoring the other party. At least you can get the approval of one side. Mediation by enforcing the law impartially will only make people on both sides think you are biased. If I'm not mistaken, when you asked that question, both of them had one in their hearts. The idea that dear Mr. Hohenzollern finally realized his mistake and was willing to apologize to me. Impossible. Karl denied it directly and began to analyze it out of habit. No, when I left the dormitory today, they both acted unusually calm. It was completely different from before. It shows that my education has been a great success. They have already, but as he was analyzing, Karl suddenly realized that something seemed to be wrong, and he stood there in silence. Dumbledore looked at the silent boy, his mouth almost grinning to the back of his head, and waited quietly for a while. He encouraged in a somewhat naughty way, go ahead, keep talking. We are a family, right? I'd love to hear some of my child's emotional confusion. I can give you some advice. At least I'm more experienced than you in this area, so tell me what you figured out. Shut up, Karl, rudely interrupted Dumbledore's buzzing, and spoke in a very firm tone, but the firmness in his tone could not conceal his current embarrassment. His brain was working rapidly, and he began to use the memory palace to reconstruct everything he had experienced today. As memory scenes flashed through his mind, Mr. Hohenzollern, who had just been chatting and laughing while holding the fate of the entire magical world in his hands, was revealed. At this moment, I couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. No wonder those two guys suddenly stood up when I was about to leave. Are those two idiots so simple-minded? They all thought the cake was for one of them. Karl complained in his heart, but on the surface he tried to appear calm, staring at Dumbledore with disdain. Impossible. You are just making groundless assumptions. My subordinates are all elites. They can't be so stupid. I'd be such a fool without it. But aren't you? Said Dumbledore, smiling. What did you say? Karl roared angrily, like a golden monkey whose tail was stepped on. It looks very intimidating with its fangs and claws bared. Dumbledore put away his sarcastic smile, changed into his usual kind expression, and quietly looked at the angry boy in front of him. He spoke calmly. You always call that Mr. Diggory a fool with a pumpkin head in your comments. Aren't you the same? I admit that you have talents in magic and many other aspects that ordinary people cannot even dream of, but you have to admit that when you face a stranger, you can always use your habitual performance, play the role that the other person wants to see the most. But once you meet a friend who truly walks into your heart, you are sometimes as dull as a fool. In a sense, you are also a fool, since you're an idiot. I won't teach you any complicated techniques. Just remember one thing when you go back to apologize. When facing a fool, sincerity is the best weapon. Smart people will never be liked by fools. Chapter 271 Karl 039's conflict. Time flies and another week has passed. In Karl's dormitory of Hufflepuff House. This is a system designed according to your needs. The basic testing process has been completed, and it can meet the technical indicators you require. These are the adaptation software you requested photo and video recording, music decoding, and other basic functions. The online payment function you requested is also basically complete, but in order to actually use this function, it needs the support of the Muggle Bank. This is not something I can help you with. Generally speaking, I have already completed the work you requested. Cedric used his laptop to demonstrate to Karl the programs he had written. While introducing them with a blank expression on his face, Karl looked at these computer programs with surprise on his face. He thought that the other party would not be able to complete these tasks until at least the end of this month. I didn't expect that only a week had passed, and it had been completed ahead of schedule, and with such a high degree of completion. Humph. You really only care about work, you annoying bastard. Seeing Carol just staring at the computer, more than a week has passed without any apology. Cedric couldn't help feeling dissatisfied, and kept complaining in his mind. Karl didn't notice this at all. He turned to look at Cedric happily, and said in an exaggerated tone, Mr. Diggory, I didn't expect you to be able to give me such a big surprise. With your help, my plan can be implemented smoothly. Don't worry, all the compensation I promised to you will be paid within a week after the press conference starts. Not only will you be able to pay off all your debts, but you will also become one of the richest people in the wizarding world, and your name will be recorded in future history books. Who cares about these things? Cedric muttered softly, and the unhappy expression on his face became more and more intense. After the system finished running, he slammed the lid of the laptop shut, almost pinching Karl's fingers. If there is nothing else, my work is all done. I look forward to your performance, Mr. Hohenzollern. I believe that must be a very unique performance. I'm leaving now because I still have homework to finish. Seeing that Carol had no intention of apologizing, Cedric picked up the computer and walked out of the dormitory door without looking back. Before leaving, he did not forget to make some sarcastic remarks in a sarcastic tone. Looking at the other person's back, Cole wanted to stand up and reach out to call the other person several times, but every time he stretched out his hand, that hand seemed to be out of control and was unwilling to go up and hold her other person. Even my vocal cords seemed to have failed at that moment. I had a lot to say, but I couldn't utter a single word. This was not the first time Cedric had done this to himself, including Mr. Lestrange. The entire dormitory had not heard the noisy voices of the two of them for a long time. Every day when he entered these dormitories, he felt like he was entering a morgue. It's that feeling where there are people around watching you, but there's just a dead feeling, and no sound at all. Over the past week, communication between the few people has been basically limited to work. Kevin Lestrange came over just to show him some documents or get some bills for him to sign. Even if I asked him one more question, he seemed unwilling to say another word. Needless to say, Cedric just spoke to me for the first time in a week, and I had only seen him the other time. He was either writing programs or keeping his head down and keeping silent. He didn't even steal any cakes. He thought that might be the reason why the other party's work speed increased so much. But he didn't want or like this way of improving efficiency. Seeing the other person's back getting farther and farther away, Karl suddenly rushed out like a rocket, holding Cedric's shoulder tightly with one hand. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed red, but he couldn't utter a word. Is there anything else, Mr. Hohenzollern? Cedric turned and looked at Cole with a frosty expression. Of course, that was what he thought. From Karl's perspective, he saw the puffy face and pouting mouth. It wasn't a cold face at all. Although he looked very angry, he also seemed easy to coax. But even so, Karl still couldn't utter a word, and the two little men were already fighting in the memory palace. A cute blonde little boy wearing a white silk coat of an ancient Roman boy is looking at a blonde shamed little boy wearing a black vest with a smirk on his face. He kept punching and beating, talking all the time. You must apologize immediately. It was you who said those words that caused misunderstanding. You must bravely take responsibility. Besides, they are your friends and partners. Maintaining a good friendship is what a good classmate and good friend should do. The blonde shamed little boy kept fighting back, while speaking with disdain in an arrogant tone. They say I'm nothing more than a friend. I'm just a pawn being used. Besides, I did nothing wrong. They are just being self-indulgent and their own fantasies have nothing to do with us. The future needs leaders who will rule the world. How can you bow your head and apologize? Not even once. After that, the two little boys started fighting again. At the beginning, their moves were relatively common, except for the unconventional turtle punch point. They were just pulling each other's hair, and Karl, who was watching the fight in his mind, felt his scalp aching when he saw the golden hair all over the ground point. As the battle became more and more intense, the shamed little boy gradually gained the upper hand. Because this guy had no martial ethics, he actually went to grab the clothes on the opposite side. That ancient Roman boy's coat wrapped in silk was actually a whole piece of cloth point under the other party's pull. The cute little blonde boy could only pull his clothes hard while yelling loudly with a red face, "Don't act like a hooligan. Have you forgotten what Headmaster Dumbledore taught you? You have to impress others with your sincerity." "What? Use is there for sincerity?" The shamed little boy laughed pervertedly and tore the other person's clothes madly point while saying it bluntly. "You should now push that pumpkin head against the wall and tell him condescendingly that he has to come to the next press conference. If he doesn't come, you'll use magic to turn him into a doll, then take off his pants and spank him hard." "No, that's too much." Karl in his mind firmly rejected it. The little blonde boy, whose upper body was almost stripped naked, finally showed a glimmer of hope in his eyes when he heard this, but the next second the dawn was extinguished because Karl had returned to reality and pressed Cedric directly against the wall of the common room. He looked down at the other person with his face close to his and gave orders in a dragging tone. "You have to come to the press conference at the end of this month. This is not an invitation, but you can't refuse." Chapter 272. Cedric lets it slip. "Why?" Cedric said expressionlessly. "Yes, why?" Cole was stunned for a moment, and his momentum dropped a lot in an instant. On the other side, Cedric took advantage of the situation and began to use the same tactics he had used before, asking the other party to answer frame by frame and sentence by sentence. "Of course there is no problem with attending the press conference, but you should at least tell us why. Is it work related, or maybe it's just a simple friend, but the invitation still has other purposes? I think it's even a subordinate of a company. You should also have the right to know. Moreover, you just said that it was not an invitation. So, Mr. Hohenzollern, what was your purpose in saying those words just now?" This. Karl began to panic, especially when the two of them were talking, which attracted many Hufflepuff students to watch. Under the gazes of everyone, he actually had the thought of retreating for the first time. "You can't back down. This is a betrayal of your life creed. Be tough. You are his leader and you are giving him direct orders." In the memory palace, two little boys were roaring loudly. One was so anxious that tears were about to fall, while the other one still had her arrogant expression. But at this moment, Karl's brain seemed to be disconnected, and his body unconsciously retreated. Cedric also saw that the other party was in distress, and after a second-long mental struggle, he began to approach the other party. For every step Karl took back, Cedric took a step forward. Until Carol retreated to the door of the dormitory, rubbed his hands nervously together, and looked at Cedric with an embarrassed expression. His body involuntarily shrank down a little, so that he, who was already a head taller than Cedric, was no longer taller than him. Looking even shorter than the other person at this moment, Cedric looked down at Karl, trying hard to remain calm on the surface. But contrary to the calm surface he managed to maintain, huge waves were surging in his heart. This was the first time in the more than 1 year that he had known Karl, that he had seen him in this state, without that domineering and high-spirited look. Some people only feel embarrassed, awkward and ashamed, but just looking at each other makes them feel refreshed and happy. At the same time, it's also a little cute. Bully him well and let this annoying guy know that you are not easy to bully. In my mind, Cedric the Devil spoke loudly. "No, we can't take advantage of someone's misfortune. Carol has already realized his mistake. He has done his best by taking the initiative to talk to us. He is so proud. We should not continue to embarrass him, and we should not team up with Mr. Lestrange. In My mind. The little angel Cedric spoke righteously. Unfortunately, before he could finish his words, he was pinned to the ground by the little devil beside him, who beat him up and yelled at him loudly. What do you mean by teaming up? There is no collusion or conspiracy here. He was the first to make the mistake. He acted so arrogantly. He really thought he was the boss and completely ignored the emotional needs between friends. It's his fault anyway. He must apologize in person. And, dear Mr. Diggory, do you really want to be controlled by this man for the rest of your life? The devil's whispers were indeed more bewitching than the angel's warnings. The little angel Cedric didn't even have time to speak. In reality, Cedric suddenly reached out and pressed the wall behind Carlson. Use him to stay up late to watch anime. Oh no, some cool lines that I accidentally learned while staying up late to write code. He stared down at Carol's eyes and asked in a deliberately low voice, Mr. Hohenzollern, please answer my previous question before I get a definite answer. I will refuse your order. This is not a request, but a notice. Crack. The sounds of countless snack packages being torn open could be heard at the same time, and the Hufflepuff students watching were almost moved to tears while eating snacks and looking at the beautiful scenery in front of me. I suddenly felt that there was no regret in my life. Mr. Hohenzollern, who was well known in the British wizarding world, being pressed against the wall and interrogated forcefully. Is there anything more exciting than this? Second, Carol stuttered for a long time, his face flushed red, but he couldn't say a complete sentence. Looking at the other person's embarrassed look, Cedric felt a sense of pleasure rushing from his toes to the top of his head. So he continued to question. Answer me. I just want a simple answer. Was what you just said to me an invitation, or did you have some other purpose? Warning. Warning. In Carl's brain memory palace, red light kept flashing around the palace, and the surrounding temperature had become unbearable. It seemed like a fire could break out at any time. Even the two little boys had disappeared long ago. They might have been afraid of getting accidentally hurt by the fire. Back in reality, Cedric looked down at Karl, whose face was red, but who couldn't even speak a complete sentence. My mood was extremely good, and my favorability towards Mr. Lestrange increased by 1%. Sure enough, that bastard still has some brains. As long as we join forces with the two of them, we can make Carol mistakenly think that we are really sad. He will definitely come to us for help. This feeling is really great. Oh no. Suddenly, there were exclamations coming from behind, which made Cedric look back, only to see the Hufflepuff students behind him. All the snacks in my hands had fallen to the ground, and the look in his eyes was filled with pity, sympathy, and a bit of resentment for not living up to his expectations. Seeing those looks, Cedric suddenly felt that something was wrong, and sure enough, he hadn't even turned his head back. Then a cold voice was hurt. Pretend to be sad, use the cold violence, and don't talk to me. Is this your plan? What? An excellent plan, but he chose the wrong teammate. He shouldn't have chosen a fool as his teammate. You used magic on me. Cedric turned his head with difficulty, trying to pretend to be accusing him. You used magic to eavesdrop on my thoughts, but even though he tried to make himself look righteous and a little angry, his panicked eyes and trembling body having already exposed his true thoughts, Karl slowly stood up and grabbed his wrist that was pressing against the wall with his right hand. She pinched his chin tightly with her left hand, forcing him to raise his head while she stood on tiptoes and stared down at him. I didn't use any magic on you, Mr. Diggory. You spoke your mind out loud. You really are a super awesome little genius. Let's go back to the dormitory and discuss the upcoming press conference. Can I not go? Cedric no longer had any arrogance and pleaded with a painful expression. What do you think? Karl smiled kindly. Then he grabbed the man's tie and dragged him into the dormitory. After the dormitory door was slammed shut, the drama in the Hufflepuff common room came to an end. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 273, The Unyielding Kevin Lestrange. From the end of get out of class to the corridor, and from the corridor to the common room, Kevin Lestrange felt countless strange gazes along the way. There is gloating and silent warnings, but more of it is just pure gossip. Feeling the message conveyed by those eyes, he knew without thinking too much that there would be a good show. When he returned to the dormitory, sure enough, as soon as I opened the door of the dormitory, I saw that big-headed annoying guy doing squats on the yoga mat while crying. Cole was sitting next to a small table with 2 square whiskey glasses on it, but no sign of any bottle. "Mr. Lestrange, I think we need to talk," Karl invited calmly. "Of course," Kate Lestrange responded easily. After putting away the books and sundries, she sat down face to face with Karl. "You want to drink something? Sherry, whiskey, and as a Frenchman, maybe a smooth wine, Bordeaux, red wine, cognac, and Armagnac," Karl asked calmly. But in Kevin Lestrange's eyes, the other party deliberately asked this kind of question, obviously to find trouble. Considering his current magical transformation, this alcoholic beverage is obviously inappropriate. A 11-year-old child drinking alcohol in school is not suitable. Not to mention Hogwarts, no school in the world would allow it. But once I ask for other ordinary drinks, doesn't it mean that I have given in before I even start talking? During this brainstorming session, he crossed his arms, raised his head, and imitated the other person in speaking calmly. "Give me a gin." "Ah." Karl looked at the other person in confusion. After looking him up and down, he quickly realized that the other person must have overthought it again. The other party must have imagined that he had discovered the secret, that he and Cedric had conspired to plot against him. He came here specifically to call for accusations, but in fact he just wanted to ask the other party some work-related questions. As for the conspiracy against him, he was prepared to deal with it coldly. Thinking of the embarrassing scene in the common room, "It's really embarrassing," Karl couldn't help but stroke his forehead with his hand. He really didn't want to dwell on this matter anymore. So when the other party suggested drinking gin, he had no intention of persuading him. He took out a bottle of Sir Henry's collection of Dugangzi wine from his ring, and then poured about 20 milliliters for each of them. Putting down the bottle, Karl clapped his hands gently again. After receiving the signal, the house elf hiding in the dark quickly placed the ice bucket on the table. Karl picked up the tongs and put 3 ice cubes into his glass while asking Kevin Lestrange in the friendliest voice possible, "Would you like some on the rocks? It might taste stronger if you drink it straight." "No, thank you." Kevin Lestrange refused coldly, and at the same time, glanced at Cedric, who was still doing aerobic exercise. Seeing the other person sweating profusely and looking like he had lost all hope in life, I couldn't help but feel a little nervous at the same time. He also secretly made up his mind that he must remain calm in this confrontation with Dumbledore's heir. You must not suddenly lose the ability to think rationally like last time, so as not to fall into the other party's trap. Put yourself and your organization in an awkward position. My light, I pray to you, please give me strength. Amen. Kevin Lestrange began to pray silently in his heart as usual. At the same time, Karl on the other side felt that familiar strange feeling again, but he didn't care much. He asked calmly, while holding up his glass and shaking the ice inside, crossing his legs, "What about the site selection and policy arrangements for the factory?" 80% of the production has been completed. The manufacturing of high-tech equipment and precision parts will be carried out in the autonomous region of Bavaria in Germany. The screen manufacturing and other optical components are outsourced to companies in France and Japan respectively. The motherboard production is in the Netherlands and Luxembourg. The European community is very interested in our plan and has given great support. These include a lot of industrial subsidies, preferential electricity prices, land use rights, etc. Facing the questions, Kevin Lestrange answered very professionally with a calm expression. Carol looked at the other person indifferently with a strange expression. In fact, he had already known all these things through reports. The reason why I asked this question today, even though I knew the answer, was because I wanted to use this topic to talk to the other party and resolve the previous misunderstanding and current embarrassment. But I didn't expect this guy to have such a low Cedric was practicing so hard that he was almost smoking, but this guy could still pretend not to know. No wonder he can get along so well with those politicians. At least with this kind of thick skin and psychological quality, he is born to be a political talent. After thinking about it, Karl realized that this question would not yield any results, so he decided to change his strategy. He first said in a tone of approval, "Excellent, Mr. Lestrange. Your ability to do this job is truly commendable. This job is complex and time consuming. Even a professional team may not be able to handle the situation as well as you do. I must acknowledge and praise this. Thank you for the compliment." Kevin Lestrange responded emotionlessly. But that was only what he thought. Karl, who was sitting opposite him, heard the happiness and joy hidden deep in the other person's memories. While the other party was just relaxing a little, he suddenly changed the subject and asked with a curious look, "Don't be modest. You deserve this. You will definitely become a leader in the future. This is a good opportunity for you. Suppose you are the boss of a company now, and suddenly one day you find that your subordinates are colluding and conspiring. What will you do?" Some fool must have let it slip. Without a moment's hesitation, Kevin Lestrange continued to respond emotionlessly. What to?" Exclamations came from two directions of the dormitory at the same time. Carol's cheeks twitched, and he looked at the boy in front of him, not knowing what to say for a moment. Cedric pleaded with a crazy look in his eyes, hoping that the other party would not admit it. After all, as long as the other party did not admit it, he would insist that what he had just said was crazy. Otherwise, he really couldn't imagine how Carol would deal with him later. "You know, Mr. Hohenzollern is a well-known petty person, generally speaking, unless they are mentally retarded or have some kind of mental illness. Subordinates will collude with their leaders to stage a coup. That must be 100% certain. As a leader, if I could get this news, there would only be one possibility. There are traitors or fools among the coup d'etat team. Such rubbish should be killed to the last drop. Don't give him a chance to turn things around, Karen." Lestrange replied with her face still expressionless on the other side. Karl looked at him with helplessness on his face, while Cedric looked completely dumbfounded. There was a look of utter despair in his eyes, as if to say, "Do you have to be so cruel? Do you want to kill everyone if they say something wrong?" Chapter 274 Sincerity is always the last resort. Cedric first glanced at Carol, his eyes full of pleading, like a puppy that had been scolded outside. Looking at its owner, the eyes seemed to say, "Listen, is this human language? Speak to him, speak to him." Unfortunately, Karl did not respond to him, but just looked at Kevin Lestrange in front of him with a complicated look. He has already begun to imagine in his mind that the other person might be thinking about some immature pictures in his mind. This guy's really too into the role. "Ah, you stunned by my words?" Kevin Lestrange felt relieved and glanced at Cedric coldly. "Poor little fool, you really thought I would give you advice? With your not so smart brain, I already expected you to let it slip. Do you think everyone is willing to be the opponent's pawn like you? Turn the tables and let the opponent see your methods. Only then can the other party truly know their own value. Blindly pleasing others is never a good partner. The highest level of partnership is to be irreplaceable." Kevin Lestrange closed his eyes slightly, trying to look deep. Seeing Karl's eyelids twitching, he could already foresee what would happen if he continued to ask questions based on the nature of the performance. Ask the other person, "How did you know in advance that Cedric would let the cat out of the bag?" This guy will 100% pretend that he had expected it and say it in an arrogant tone. "I arranged everything in advance. I had expected this guy's intelligence to be high. He was so self-righteous that he thought I would cooperate with him. He's just a pawn being used by others." Carol couldn't help scratching his head when he thought of the embarrassing scene, and the weird silence lasted for a full 5 minutes. He slowly stood up and sighed helplessly, then walked to his desk and took out a delicate little cake from the drawers on both sides. The shape of the cake was exactly the same as the one he made that day. The only difference was the presentation, and the flavors of the cake were directly marked with the corresponding fruits. He brought the two cakes in front of the two guys, took a deep breath, and spoke calmly. "I Didn't know that it had such an impact on you two because it was just a quick question. Whether you two are pretending or colluding with each other. I hope this whole thing ends today. Although that stinky old man is annoying. He was right in saying one thing. It is meaningless to argue about right and wrong in some things. Please accept these two cakes. Accept my apology and admit my fault. Please don't continue. Two puzzled exclamations came out at the same time, and Cedric looked at Carol in surprise. He didn't expect that this guy didn't even think about taking revenge on him. But he quickly reacted, hid the cake behind him, and then asked indignantly, since you admit that this is your mistake, why do you still want to punish me? I'm not punishing you because you cheated on me, Karl replied with a smile. It's just because you're a little overweight. Even if this incident hadn't happened, you wouldn't be able to escape this punishment. It would just be postponed for a while at most. Look at your stomach. Don't think that all food is as healthy as the little cakes I made. Not everyone is going to think hard about your health. Cedric's brain froze instantly, and his previous aggressive luck disappeared without a trace. He looked at Carol, walked silently to his side, and asked in an extremely weak voice, are you really not angry? You are not holding a grudge, and are using this cake to make us let down our guard. Then take revenge on us in a stronger way, just like you did to those guys. Which guys? Karl smiled kindly, suddenly stared at Cedric closely, and slowly leaned forward to get close to him. Just when their faces were about to touch each other, Cedric closed his eyes in fear. Karl suddenly stretched out his finger and flicked the other person's forehead, then looked at Cedric, who was squatting in pain, holding his forehead. Kevin Lestrange, who was still in a daze, smiled sincerely and said helplessly, okay. I admit, I almost apologized to you in public in the public lounge for the past week. I don't know why I feel this way. It's just that you don't want to communicate with me anymore. I just felt really upset and had this insecurities that I couldn't talk about. It was really humbling. Or, in other words, I'm more used to you noisy people. Shocked. Completely shocked, Cedric looked at Carol with his mouth wide open, already so surprised that he couldn't utter a word. He had never seen Karl like this before, and he had never imagined for even a second that such words would come out of his mouth. Even when this annoying guy first approached me about working with him, I had told him clearly, you are naive, Mr. Lestrange. Karl Hohenzollern is an absolutely proud man. There is no way he would not speak to him, just because of the two of us. Just apologizing to both of us out of nowhere. This childish approach will never succeed. But now, the facts are in front of him, and Carol's voice has not completely disappeared from his mind. This childish method has truly achieved the impossible that was once unimaginable. No. After being surprised, Cedric reacted instantly. He stared at Kevin Lestrange, who was still in a daze, with an extremely firm look. How did this guy come up with this idea? On what basis did he come up with it? He and Carol have been living under the same roof for less than 2 months. Why does he know Carol so well? This bastard really has some hidden tricks. I trusted him so much. Now I think everything was a trap set by him. What a bad guy. Just like that, without Karl's knowledge, the short-lived alliance fell apart in an instant. Cedric's favorable impression of Kevin Lestrange, which had increased with great difficulty by 2%, instantly turned into negative 100%. On the other side, Karl sat back in his seat and placed the small cake filled with the aroma of lemon and citrus next to the other person. At the same time he spoke again. Mr. Lestrange, thank you for your service, and please accept my sincere apology. Listening to this and looking at the little cake, Kevin Lestrange, who was just about to turn the tables and control the opponent. At this point, I'm completely confused, and my brain's efficiency inexplicably drops by 99%, especially when he looked up and accidentally saw Karl's warm smile. The remaining 1% disappeared without a trace. The Kingsman agent inexplicably turned into a fool in an instant. And in his panic, he didn't even touch the cake. Instead, he suddenly grabbed the wine glass in front of him and drank the 20 milliliters of high concentration gin in one gulp. With a loud thud, Kevin Lestrange fell drunkenly to the floor. Chapter 275. Weird Ron. Mr. Hohenzollern, You can't leave Hogwarts. You can't leave your dear classmates too early. You can't give up Hogwarts. We can't lose you. Karl, Cedric, Kevin Lestrange, Harry, Draco, and Hermione on the grass beside the Black Lake at Hogwarts Castle Point. They were sitting in a circle, enjoying a picnic, while appreciating the delicious food. 2 weeks had passed since Karl resolved his dormitory crisis. It is already the end of October and Hogwarts has entered deep autumn. The scenery and weather have also reached the most beautiful time of the year. The Hogwarts castle in the distance was shrouded in a light mist, and the ancient stone walls of the castle appeared even more solemn and mysterious in the morning light. Point by the Black Lake, ripples appeared on the water under the blowing of the autumn wind, and a few fallen leaves were floating on the surface of the lake. Point they swayed gently on the water, as if telling the story of autumn. Point the willow trees by the lake have put on golden coats, swaying gently in the wind, making rustling sounds, adding a bit of liveliness to this quiet morning. Point with such beautiful scenery around him, Karl took the initiative to invite his friends to have a picnic by the lake. Point at the same time, he announced to them that he would be leaving Hogwarts Castle for a while and going to the United States and Europe to hold press conferences. Everything was fine at the beginning. Miss Harry was very virtuous and prepared delicious sandwiches and fruits that she grew herself. Point the atmosphere at the picnic was unusually harmonious, but the moment Karl announced the news, Draco instantly got furious and spoke angrily while fighting with Cedric for the last few sandwiches. Calm down, Mr. Malfoy, and you need to be more precise with your words. I just need to leave Hogwarts for a while. If a stranger heard what you just said, they would think I died inexplicably. Besides, the school has been so peaceful during this period, and there's nothing that needs me. Karl glared at Malfoy and spoke unhappily. That's not the case, Mr. Hohenzollern. Draco said anxiously. There is a hidden dark force in the castle now. They have been making moves, and if you leave Hogwarts, they will definitely take action. Dark power. Cole was puzzled and looked at Harry and Hermione beside him. Don't listen to Draco's nonsense. Harry spoke first. He was not wearing women's clothes today, but it might be because of his living habits. Even if Miss Harry was wearing boys' clothes now, her posture and manners alone would be enough to rank her in the top 10 of the Hogwarts beauties, and our little Gryffindor princess seems to have completely tamed the noble Slytherin Malfoy. Point just a look made Draco dare not say another word, and he looked at Karl and spoke in a gentle tone. The dark power Draco was talking about is Ron. In the recent monthly exams, Ron's grades have improved by leaps and bounds. Just yesterday, in the October monthly exam, Ron's score surpassed Draco's for the first time since that day. Draco has been saying that Ron might have been possessed by a dark wizard, otherwise his grades would never have surpassed his. I think he is just jealous of others. I'm jealous of him. Draco, who had been silent just now, stood up instantly in anger when he heard what Harry said. How could I be jealous of someone like him? A slacker with no friends who only cares about eating. Why would I be jealous of him? How can I be inferior to him? Yes, yes, yes. Looking at the fire-breathing little dragon tamer, Harry began to show his skills. He first grabbed Draco's right hand point, then he spoke perfunctorily in a gentle tone. Mr. Malfoy is the best. How could that red-haired brat compare to him, whether in terms of academic performance or popularity? Wouldn't that mean he can be killed easily in 1 second? But you also have to pay attention to your own state. We are having a dinner party, so you have to be polite, Malfoy. A few words directly turned the fire-breathing dragon into a docile golden retriever. Although Draco was still unconvinced, he was still scolded by Ron. But that pouty little mouth saw Harry take out a brand new packaged sandwich from the food basket on the other side. It instantly turned into a smile, coupled with Harry's meek head patting tactic. Draco, who was extremely angry just now and looked like he wanted to eat someone, immediately turned into a cute and obedient boy. Looking at the scene in front of him, Karl felt his eyelids twitching wildly, and he suddenly felt his sex-changing magic. Maybe it's necessary to practice a little, otherwise Mr. Lucius Malfoy might come after me at some point in the future. After all, the Malfoy family is a single-line family. There's basically nothing wrong with what Harry said. Hermione, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke just as Karl had finished admiring a big melon. Mr. Malfoy has such suspicions, 90% out of jealousy, but Ron's recent behavior is indeed a bit abnormal, according to my investigation. He even carried out some secret student organization activities in Gryffindor College. There were even a few times when I saw him having intimate exchanges with students from Slytherin House. That might just be a simple exchange between friends. Harry spoke up again to defend Ron. At the same time, he held down the other side tightly because Draco was about to go crazy again when he heard the word jealousy. But even if Harry tried his best, he still couldn't hold Draco back. Draco growled as he stood up. He will have friends too. Stop being funny. He can't even get along well with his former roommates. A pervert with a dark mind like him can't possibly have any real friends. He must be plotting something, and I must stress that I'm not jealous of that guy at all. Okay, Draco, I'm going to get angry if you keep talking. Harry stood up and stomped his feet hard, then turned and left. After he left, Draco hurriedly chased after him, and before leaving, he did not forget to take the sandwich that Harry had specially prepared for him. This action made Cedric particularly sad, and Kevin Lestrange, who had been acting as an invisible man, finished the last cup of coffee. He turned calmly and looked at Karl. Would you like me to stay and help you keep an eye on him? Why should you stay? Cedric shouted. Just because I'm smarter than you stupid pumpkinhead, Kevin Lestrange said with disdain. As a result, the two people who had been very quiet just now immediately started arguing over the issue of who would stay. Listening to the noisy noise, Hermione looked at Karl silently and nodded slightly. I'll keep an eye on it for you. There's no problem with the work. I just want to stop them from arguing. I want to enjoy the beautiful scenery quietly. Karl showed a satisfied smile. He was indeed one of his most worry-free subordinates. He knew what to do without any orders. As for the other party's request, of course it must be met, so he pretended to be nonchalant and suddenly spoke. It seems that Hogwarts is more attractive than me. You all prefer to stay and look after this crappy school. Then hurry up and take you two away from the school alone. I'm being too sentimental. Chapter 276. The world is focusing here. 1992, 10-month 31-day. Santa Clara County, California. In an amphitheater-like building, countless journalists and companies from all over the world are gathering to launch the so-called first global internet conference. The reason why it is called the first internet conference. This is because the organizer of this conference is very mysterious, and the invitation method is very unique and sophisticated, without any paper invitation letters. But the night before, all major internet companies in the world, such as Intel and Apple in the United States, Toshiba and Sony in Japan, etc. The main system of the official website was suddenly hacked, and a hacker virus hijacked the hosts of many technology companies. They were asked to come to this building today to attend this meeting, and were given 24 hours to save themselves. If they don't unlock the virus after 24 hours and don't come to the conference, all data on the company's official website will be automatically deleted and can never be recovered. This explosive news instantly made headlines around the world, even on the global internet, which was beginning to take shape. All major forums are filled with discussions about this matter, with countless elite hackers and elite corporate technical executives participating. Everyone tried to crack the virus in the past 24 hours, but all failed. At the same time, all major media around the world also came to witness this unique conference. The atmosphere at the scene was already very heated. Many elite hackers who had been hiding in the internet for many years appeared in the public eye for the first time. Executives of the companies being held hostage have all arrived at the scene, and FBI officers are also in place. In front of the camera, executives from major internet companies around the world denounced this despicable behavior, while at the same time speaking some high-sounding clichés about network security. In comparison, some hackers' words are much more interesting. We don't care whether the data of those big companies will be deleted. I only care about the means they used to do it. The techniques they used were incredibly simple, yet they were able to thwart all cyber attacks launched against them. To put it in the simplest terms, if the cyber attack is likened to the Normandy landing, we are more like ordinary American soldiers holding M1 Garand rifles. They were German soldiers hiding in bunkers with heavy machine guns. Our tactics were the same. We all raised our guns and shot at them, but we can only fire 8 bullets at a time, but they can fire thousands of bullets at us in a second. No CPU in the world can achieve this level. This is the only point that makes us curious. A spokesperson for Darkside, a world-renowned hacker group, said that all of these hackers were wearing black robes, wearing an exaggerated ghost mask on his face. He sat there, clearly distinguished from the group of corporate executives wearing high-end suits, and with an elitist attitude. As time passed, the press conference was getting closer. Reporters set up their cameras and the noise at the scene reached a climax. Internet celebrities even said something about it in their blogs. F***ck. You man, do you know how valuable these bastards sitting in this little room are? This must be a conspiracy by the Soviet Union's Red Hacker organization. They are gathering the elites of global capitalism here in this way. They will then use cyber attacks to hijack a Minuteman III ICBM at an Air Force base in Texas, using missiles to turn the world's future network hopes directly into ashes. All of this is a Soviet conspiracy. Conspiracy theories, emergency public relations, technology worship, countless voices mixed together, making this amphitheater-like unfinished building the focus of the world at this moment. Behind the makeshift stage, they were surrounded by numerous federal investigators. Karl and the other two, who were hiding using the invisibility spell, were spying on the situation at the scene. Cole was smoking without a care in the world, and Cedric was fanning himself with his hands to avoid the secondhand smoke, while looking at the crowd outside with some anxiety. Kevin Lestrange was still making calls non-stop, and of course he used soundproofing spells to avoid being exposed while talking on the phone. With so many people involved, this is a big problem. I saw a report this morning saying that our cyber attack caused at least tens of billions of dollars in losses. I can't even imagine how much it would be if converted into gold galleons. Even if we gave the entire British wizarding world to them, it probably wouldn't be enough. Cedric was the first to lose control. Calm down. What are you afraid of? I'm here. Even if something goes wrong, I'll pay for it. No one will care about your little money, and I can bet you right now that after the press conference is over, they will not ask me for compensation. They would even try their best to ask me to sell them shares and desperately send their money to me. Karl said nonchalantly while puffing out smoke. That's right. We have been preparing for so long. Is it just for a small fight? Besides, when we launched the cyber attack yesterday, you are quite arrogant, aren't you? I rarely see that domineering look in you, Mr. Diggory. It was such an eye-opener for me. Kevin Lestrange hung up the phone and looked at Cedric, who was a little frightened, with a mocking expression. Didn't I lose my temper yesterday? And it's all your fault. You were the one who instigated me and provoked me with your words. I was just deceived by you two. How could I know that the consequences would be so serious? Cedric screamed out of control like a deceived little rabbit. What about the federal government and Europe? But no one paid attention to his anger. Karl simply ignored it and turned to look at Kevin Lestrange. The other party replied calmly, it's basically all done. Your method is indeed very unique and effective. Now the world's attention is focused here. We only have two possibilities now. Either we become billionaires or we go back to jail. Are you sure it's time to do our best? Hearing this, Carol threw the cigarette butt in his hand to the ground, stomped it out with his foot, and showed his signature smirk on his face. He stared at his two companions, one panicked and the other calm, and said with a firm look in his eyes, in my life, I have always tried my best. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand gently, and all the FBI agents hiding in the background fell into a baby-like sleep. As he walked towards the stage, he opened the restrictions of the dog system in his mind and spoke in a kind voice. Ah, you ready? I'm about to fulfill my last wish. Always be prepared, dear host. Let the whole world welcome the arrival of the true Demon King! Exclamation mark. GGG. Chapter 277, leading humanity into the 1 GHz era. Please close your eyes when it gets dark. A young man's voice suddenly rang out, and all the lights in the venue went out. The extremely noisy venue instantly fell into an eerie silence. Everyone in the darkness looked at each other until a spotlight poured down from above the center of the stage. A blond boy wearing a simple woolen top, blue tight jeans and black framed glasses suddenly appeared in front of everyone. With a gentle smile on his face, he faced the countless camera lights and calmly opened his hands. "Please, open your eyes at dawn." As soon as he finished speaking, all the lights in the venue lit up at the same time. This scene, which was like a magic show, was broadcast live to the world through the cameras on the scene. The British BBC, the American PBS, the German ZDF, the Japanese NHK, and television channels in countless countries have hundreds of millions of viewers speaking different languages at the same time. We witnessed this magical scene, and after the simple performance was over, the young man in the center of the stage spoke slowly. "Thank you to all my colleagues and media friends for coming here to witness the greatest internet innovation of this century. To many of you right now, I may be thinking that I'm nothing more than a con man or magician, using hyperbole to attempt to attract global attention. But I can tell you clearly that what I just achieved was not the result of any magic tricks. It's not some unknown magic. It comes only from the most core power of mankind, the great technology." As soon as he finished speaking, the conference room, which had been extremely quiet just a moment ago, suddenly became noisy, with executives from all the famous internet companies in the world coming to the scene. Everyone was talking loudly without caring about their image, and even some hackers thought that the young man on the stage was crazy. You have to know that this building is not small. Using language to control hundreds of light bulbs in the entire building requires an extremely powerful computing center. Even the most advanced Intel Pentium processor in the world today has 310 million transistors and is manufactured using an 800 nanometer process with a main frequency of 60 MHz. A control system can be built using such a CPU. The server built to achieve this function is also large enough to be half the size of an ordinary house. But there was no sign of any server at the scene, nor was there any noise or heat from the operation of any computer terminals. Just when everyone thought it was just a silly prank, the boy on the stage suddenly took out the money from his jeans pocket. He took out a CPU, and at the same time, the red brick wall behind him suddenly lit up and turned into a huge high-definition screen. Countless parameter specifications appeared behind him, along with a highlighted company name, Magic Future. Please do not doubt what you just heard. This function is controlled by a complete computer terminal, just as you imagined. But contrary to what you might think, this feature does not require a large and complex server. He only needs a personal PC terminal, and the core of it is this one in my hand, the Magic 1000 CPU. Karl, on the stage, holding the chip in his hand high, paced back and forth slowly on the stage. Then he announced loudly when all the cameras were focused on him, "Magic 1000 will be a revolutionary computer CPU. Its main parameters and specifications are closely related to the number 1000 because it marks that the main frequency of human computer processors has officially entered the 1000 MHz era. 10nm process technology, quad-core quad-thread, single-core main frequency 1.1 GHz, full-core acceleration frequency 1 GHz. What? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Moore's law no longer exists. This is simply a dimensionality reduction attack by aliens. The full core acceleration frequency is 1 GHz, and there are 4 cores at the same time, which means that this CPU is equivalent to 200 Intel Pentium Celeron processors, and there is no need to consider the frequency drop caused by CPU series connection. The technology company executives present at the scene all kept saying impossible, as if they were possessed by a ghost. Other hackers and internet celebrities were extremely excited and kept broadcasting their personal blogs on the radio via wireless equipment. Trying hard to explain to your listeners how awesome this CPU is on the other side of the American continent, inside the Wall Street Stock Exchange in New York. The telephones kept ringing. Countless traders were running around frantically on the technology sector of the New York Stock Exchange, just because this didn't make for a 10-second film or a second TV broadcast. The stock prices of famous technology companies such as Intel, IBM, and Microsoft experienced the largest plunge since the Great Depression. They all fell by about 10%. to 20%, and tens of billions of capital began to rapidly leave the stock market. Become free capital ready to go at any time. As one of the famous radio bloggers at the scene said, if the teenager is not kidding, he will become one of the richest people on the planet within 24 hours. If he had only orchestrated this mischief, then he would not have lost out, for it would have been the highest personal debt ever incurred by a human being. At this moment, the global capital markets are waiting for the young man's speech. Finally, as everyone expected, a technical executive in a black suit from Intel, the leader in the CPU industry, appeared. As soon as he stepped onto the stage, this middle-aged man with more than half of his hair bald pointed at Carol and shouted angrily, "This is a silly prank, absolutely silly," and what he was holding was just a piece of broken glass. The creation of this kind of thing completely violates the laws of science and is an insult to the internet and technology. Facing the executive's attack, Karl appeared unusually calm. He clapped his hands lightly, and the large screen behind him suddenly began to change. A very complete set of lithography machine design drawings appeared behind him. Thanks to this colleague for coming out and releasing such a groundbreaking product as a newly established company. Naturally, many people will think this is just a silly prank, but we are not like some companies. Once they have a monopoly in the market, they update their products every year just like squeezing toothpaste, and they keep making fun of all their loyal customers. Our company has always been open and inclusive, just like the great American spirit. Now that we have mastered the most advanced technology on the planet, then you should proudly display it to everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, your peers and the leaders of the online world, to prove that this is not a ridiculous prank, I will show you my company's next most important plan. I call this project the Mount Olympus of the 20th century. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.